Hello and welcome to the EcoCast by Actual Tech Media. Thanks so much for joining us on the Supporting, Securing, and Enhancing Microsoft-centric Environments EcoCast event. On this event, you'll hear from experts at Veeam, Rubric, Ping Identity, Druva, RingCentral, and Open Systems. We've got an awesome EcoCast lined up for you on the event today. You'll learn about some of the most innovative Microsoft-centric solutions in the world today. You'll see these solutions in action and get all your questions answered. If you work in a Microsoft-centric IT organization or consume Microsoft solutions in some shape or form, this event is for you. And honestly, just about every company out there does. Now, before we get started, there's just a few things that you should know about the EcoCast today. We've got some awesome prizes on the event today. I'll talk about those in just a moment. We encourage your questions there in the questions pane of your audience console, and we'll have dedicated Q&A sessions with each of our expert presenters. So we need your questions, and we have best question prizes to help encourage those questions as well. I'll even have some poll questions for you during the event today. We also want this to be a social event. You can socialize this directly from your console using the Twitter icon on the screen, and the hashtag for today will be automatically appended. I'll also talk about a number of other social resources here coming up in just a moment. But first, I want to point out that there in the Handouts tab, you can download a number of hand-selected resources. These resources are recommended by our expert presenters. We've got special trial links, ebooks, white papers, solution briefs, and more. So make sure that you check those out. The prizes on the EcoCast today are 3 Amazon $500 gift cards. You must be live in attendance to qualify, and I will be announcing the winner periodically during the event. We also have our best question prize winners. Of course, you have to ask a question there in the questions pane to be entered into the prize drawing. The prize winners will be selected and contacted after the event. Winners must meet the Actual Tech Media prize terms and conditions, which you can find there in your Handouts tab. All prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to Actual Tech Media, and of course, you always have the option to make a donation to one of our selected charities. If you win a prize and you'd like to donate it to charity, we would love to help you do that. We've donated thousands of dollars over the years thanks to generous prize winners such as yourselves. The hashtag for today over on social media is ATM EcoCast. You can follow Actual Tech Media as well over on Twitter, and me, your moderator, David M. Davis. Subscribe to all the Actual Tech Media social channels on YouTube, Facebook, and our 10 on Tech podcast over in the iTunes store. Hey, did you know that we post all of our event recordings over on our YouTube page? If you follow us on YouTube, you'll get notifications whenever our new event recordings are posted. And if you have to choose just one of the social media, I encourage you to follow us on LinkedIn. That's where we put most of our focus. It really seems to be one of the most popular technology hubs for IT professionals today. I also encourage you to check out the Gorilla Guide Book Club. You can find a link to that there in your Handouts tab. It is gorilla.guide in your web browser. This is where you can download free, easy-to-read enterprise IT books authored by top industry experts. It's a great way to stay up to date on trending enterprise technology. And by the way, yes, all of these books are free. They are full-length books. So make sure that you check those out and download those over at gorilla.guide. Yes, they do work on your iPad or Kindle mobile device. I also want to call your attention to our Refer a Friend page there in your Handouts tab. This is where we encourage you to refer your IT friends or coworkers to Actual Tech Media's online events, and you both could win a $300 Amazon gift card. No, you don't have to split it. You'll both win a $300 Amazon gift card. We do those drawings monthly, and you can find the link to that there in the Handouts tab, or at the end of the event, you'll be automatically redirected to that page. And with that, I'm excited now to bring in today's keynote presenter. Welcome, Scott Becker from Actual Tech Media. He's a veteran of Microsoft technologies, and he knows this space very well. Scott, take it away.
Thanks, David. I'm really excited for all the Microsoft infrastructure-focused solutions we're going to see and hear about at today's event, and I wanted to spend a few minutes providing a little context. I've spent more than 20 years as a technology journalist, primarily covering Microsoft as a company, as a technology platform, and as the foundation of an ecosystem of ISVs and partners. So I have a lot of thoughts. What we'll do here to set up today's event is talk about 4 lenses for looking at your Microsoft infrastructure, and hopefully some of these will be new to you and give you a good frame for the rest of the information that you'll get today. There are 3 companies that dominate the public cloud. Amazon was the first mover, and they've maintained their market share lead for an amazing 15 years. Google is third and a perennial contender, and Microsoft with Azure has staked out a solid number 2 position. There are others, but their share is pretty small. Of the big 3, Microsoft is the only one with an on-premises presence, and it's huge. The installed base of Windows Server, SQL Server on premises is a substantial continuing revenue driver for the company, and it happens to line up nicely with where most companies are with their infrastructure. New investment goes into the cloud, but there are a lot of legacy systems and processes. Those need to be maintained, sometimes upgraded, secured, backed up, etc. So of cloud's big 3, Microsoft is the only one with skin in that game, prioritizing that hybrid is working. While the previous lens is important, keep in mind where Microsoft sees growth. So Microsoft now has a market cap north of $2.5 trillion. It's one of the most successful companies of all time. To be successful in the markets, you've got to be hyper-focused on growth. And I've sat through a lot of Microsoft earnings calls with financial analysts. It's been years since Microsoft emphasized a major new version of Windows Server or SQL Server during an earnings call. What the analysts asked the company about again and again and again is how Azure growth performed against expectations. Windows Server 2022 is a big deal. SQL Server 2022 is a big deal. But expect less and less engineering talent and emphasis over the years on those on-premises platforms. Let's talk about open source. It often comes up that yes, Microsoft is committed to openness, but how serious is that commitment? After all, this is a company that famously used the phrase cancer long ago in reference to Linux and open source. Well, it's not going anywhere, and it's not just a philosophical transformation. Let's get back to the money. So Microsoft revealed in 2019 that Linux was the most used operating system on Azure, with more than 50% of Azure virtual machines running Linux. And think about it, Microsoft no longer cares that much if you run Windows or Linux in your Azure VMs. You know, sure, it makes Azure less sticky for Microsoft, easier for you to move your VM to AWS or to Google, but Azure is the growth engine. And those Linux VMs drive Azure Compute revenue, Azure Storage revenue, Azure Networking revenue, and all kinds of other Azure Service revenues for Microsoft. So for this one, I put a handful here. I was also thinking a hot mess, but Microsoft has incredible on-premises and cloud tools. The company's security operation and tooling is first rate. They're more open than ever before with great partnerships and dedicated integrations, yet they still have a lot of the problems of scale that they've always had. They've got competing technologies that are always rising and falling. You know, just think of collaboration, where they've had on-premises Link, they've had Skype, they had Yammer, there was Outlook, there still is Outlook, obviously. Now it's all coalescing around Teams. But a few years ago, it was difficult to know what to emphasize. Azure has that issue on steroids. There are at least 600 individual Azure services. It's very hard to know which ones are strategic services with serious investments behind them and which are somebody's professional hobby. In Office 365, Microsoft has engineering teams on individual features, as opposed to not marketable products, just features that are as large as many ISVs' entire companies. And those issues present huge opportunities for the solution provider ecosystem. And I'll put that ecosystem into some broad buckets. So there's simplification. These are the tools that take a function that maybe you could figure out on your own by cobbling together a bunch of Microsoft features and tools. You know, maybe backup, DR, security come to mind. But it would take a lot of time, and there's a lot of room for error when you do those kinds of things yourself. Next, there's the maturity bucket. Some Microsoft products and services aren't fully baked, documented, or well supported. A third party can often bridge those critical gaps. And then you have interop. Microsoft has, a Microsoft-centric view of the world, understandably, but we've all got broad data environments and infrastructure environments. I think of identity management here, but there are many other examples. So we're going to hear about some of those types of innovative solutions today, and I can't wait for it. So I'll turn things back to David to get us started.
All right, great presentation. Thank you so much, Scott. I've just brought up our first of 3 poll questions here. We want to get your feedback on these polls, and I will share the results of this poll with you. And I'm curious, as Scott talked about in his presentation, organizations out there are dealing with a number of pain points around Microsoft infrastructures, and we want to hear what your pain points are. Performance of the infrastructure, management of on-premises or cloud infrastructures. Is it around subscription and licensing, cost management, perhaps uptime, high availability, maybe backup and disaster recovery, data protection, RTO, RPO type of concerns. And we will be talking a lot about that, of course, on the EcoCast today. Cloud migration. Perhaps you're, in the middle of a cloud migration, or you're planning a cloud migration. Version updates, constantly patching things. Server and network security, always a big concern. Desktop or user security. Supporting remote workers, something I'm sure all of us have been dealing with over the last year. And interoperating with non-Microsoft systems. So, feel free to select more than one on this. If you don't see all those answers, you may need to scroll down depending on the size of your slides window. And I'll give everyone another moment here to respond. And then I'll share the results of this. All right, I know there's a lot of answers on there. Hopefully you've had time to review them and select. And the results are in, as they say. Looks like 35%, 34%, both tied for performance and network server security. Let's see, in the 20s, we have management, backup and disaster recovery, remote workers, desktop security. Good feedback. Thank you, everyone who responded to that. Next question here is, you've got challenges out there. So, what's your time frame for taking some kind of action on these challenges by perhaps adding new solutions of some kind or updating your existing IT solutions? Perhaps it's data protection or security tools. And I'll give everyone a moment to respond to this. We've got our first presenters here ready to go in the green room. I'll be introducing you to them here in just a few seconds. All right, thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. We do appreciate your feedback on that. It's now time to kick off the EcoCast. I'm excited now to bring in Edward Watson, Senior Global Product Marketing Manager, and Corinne Bissett, Technologist for Product Strategy at Veeam. Edward and Corinne, it's great to have you on.
Hey, thanks, David. And, we're really excited today because we've got a great topic we're excited to present on why Office 365 backup is so essential.
You all always give such a great presentation. Take it away.
Excellent. So, we've spent a lot of time talking about Teams backup. We've spent a lot of time talking about our solution in the market. And really what we're excited to talk about now is let's take it back to the why, because we know there's still so many people out there that still have, are scratching their heads, and maybe they don't quite understand why they need to back up this data. And if there's one thing you should remember, it's that bad things can and will happen. So whether it's an internal security threat in the case of a consultant, in this case, a news article where he actually deleted hundreds and hundreds of Office 365 accounts and even served jail time because of that. So something to definitely look out for. Sometimes we don't think of internal security threats. Of course, there can also be surges in attacks just in general that we saw of Q4 of last year. Malicious bugs deleting Microsoft Teams and SharePoint files. So sometimes it's the platform itself has a bug where there's there's deletions, that data loss that can occur because of malicious bugs in the platforms. And then, of course, we have various ransomware attacks that we've seen in the news. Ransomware is now a mainstream term that we're not just we're familiar with, but maybe our partners or spouses are familiar with. Ransomware is top of mind for organizations today. There are, of course, 7 reasons that you need to back up Office 365, that not just that we've identified, but that really do exist in the market. These are everything from accidental user error, which is something that happens quite often, to not quite understanding how retention policies work, and we're going to actually cover these retention policies and how they might look. Internal security threats, of course. External legal and compliance requirements are now things that we don't want to have to read a massive manual or follow 100 steps to search and recover this data. We want a very simple way to do that, and that can be easily done with a third-party backup solution. Of course, all of these reasons only become a little more complex. Complexity can really become compounded with the fact that we have to now manage many more hybrid type scenarios than we were before. And of course, the Teams data structure, and Teams is where most of us live and breathe now, and really not quite understanding how that works on the back end can really contribute to some potentials for data loss as well. So those are the 7 key reasons we want to frame today as we go throughout this presentation. Now, what is interesting about these reasons is now organizations are now recognizing that these really are risks. You can see that we, Veeam, created a survey for both SaaS admins and backup admins, and we asked this very question: what are your primary reasons for protecting this data? And you can clearly see that all of these reasons, in one way or another, are on the list. Also, I want to make clear that what's very encouraging that we see in the market is that Office 365 backup is on the rise. So more and more organizations are now becoming, really, the light bulb's going on. They're now convinced they do need a backup, and that's probably the most interesting part about this is we use the built-in Office capabilities was obviously much higher in 2020 versus today, and we use a third-party backup solution up to 45% from 2027 in 2020. So very encouraging move that we're seeing. So you would be in very good company if you, again, look to adopt that solution. So first, the number one question I get, the number one question Corinne gets, the number one question our partners get: why do I actually need a backup? Doesn't Microsoft take care of it? And there's this perception that we as the customer, Microsoft takes care of everything. They take care of the infrastructure, they take care of the data. It's all encompassed by that platform, and we can get that data back anytime, anyway, no worries. In fact, that perception is different than the reality. The reality is that Microsoft is in charge of the uptime of the data. They keep the lights on, they keep the uptime of the infrastructure. The customer, you, myself, we are in charge of our data, and we're in charge of that for not only long-term retention, short-term retention, and everything in between. So this is actually encompassed and really greatly summarized in the shared responsibility model, which Microsoft provides to really help us understand our role when it comes to the data. So Corinne's going to walk us through how that shared responsibility model looks.
Thank you. So I'm going to go ahead and build this out so we can take a look at each of these components. So as Edward mentioned, the biggest misconception that we fight is that Microsoft takes care of not just the infrastructure, but the data that lives on that infrastructure. And we see this primarily when we have conversations about software as a service, which is the main point of our presentation today. This diagram was actually made from a diagram Microsoft put out for their shared responsibility model, but breaking up what those actually mean into different sections. So primary responsibility, Microsoft does a great job of making sure you have uptime, as well as the Microsoft application, so you can do Word wherever you need to do Word, email, all of the SharePoint and collaborative sites, and the additional cloud services that they offer. That is their primary job, is to give you the availability of that infrastructure. But who has access to that infrastructure and the data that resides on that infrastructure is actually in the responsibility of the end user. This data, if it's corrupt by, say, a compromised user account, since the customer is responsible for that user account, then the data that was corrupt due to that user account is on the customer's responsibility and recoverability on their side. Microsoft also does a great job at like geo redundancy and having like recycling bins. First and second stage recycling bins allows short-term recovery in certain situations. But if you're talking about a compromised account, many of the times the user using this account to attack the infrastructure is well aware of the different retentions and are able to go in and administratively delete all of the data, not just on that front end, but that back end. And that's where you come into the security levels, making sure the physical and logical security is within Microsoft, but any accidental deletion or malicious attacks, whether it's internal or external, lie in the responsibility of the customer for that data. We also come down to regulatory responses. Microsoft does follow data privacy and regulatory controls based off of their industry certifications. But anytime you have additional types of regulatory controls that are necessary through your environment, maybe through healthcare or GDPR, anything of that nature, it's actually the responsibility of the customer to make sure that data is recoverable in a way to meet those standards. Now, to break down some of the retention policies across the board when it comes to, say, your email, your SharePoint, your OneDrive files, most of the time you have about a 30-day window within the default policies before it enters a permanent delete cycle, or in some cases move to an archive box and a second stage recycling bin in the case of SharePoint. These second stage recycling bins generally require a SharePoint administrator or an Exchange administrator in order to recover this archive data. So there is a additional level of intervention in order to get back any type of missing files. But really the more interesting fact here is it's about 140 days from the time a file is deleted till the time that it's perceived to need to be recovered. And this includes employee leaving the company. Say there's an employee that you delete as a good administrator, making sure you revoke rights. And they come back 2 months later claiming that you stole intellectual property of theirs. They never worked on it on your systems. It was never in your database. Well, if you're not able to pull back the proof that the employee worked on your property on Office 365 or Microsoft 365 applications, then you have no business case to say, yes, you were in fact the intellectual property owner of this, not the end user that was terminated. And that's really where we step in with protection with Veeam. Veeam allows you to do additional levels of backup, as in the traditional form of backup, giving you a separation of controls, separation of access. And the separation of controls and access give you back the control of your data necessary to fight all of these different cases that you may run into that Edwards previously went into for the 7 reasons why. And the solution. So Beam Backup from Microsoft Office 365 is our solution to this issue by protecting your Office 365 data from the accidental deletion that may occur in the primary environment by segmenting this data over to a separate control range. Now, this will cover Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, OneDrive for Business, and our newer addition is actually Microsoft Teams. Microsoft Teams tends to be one of the more confusing aspects, I would say, to the protection of Microsoft 365 data because it's a front-end application that allows you to do collaborative interfaces that kind of run off of a lot of back-end data and metadata from, say, OneDrive, Exchange, and SharePoint. So by being able to back up that metadata within our product for Microsoft Teams, we're able to pull into each of those different facets without you needing to individually go to the different consoles to try to find where your data was for that site. We also offer this in a community edition. If all you have are 10 users or less, you're doing a home setup, a very, very small business setup, you're able to download this completely free and be able to back up all of those users' data from all of the categories that we just talked about. Now, we talked a lot about the backup of this data, but we also offer a lot to do in the restore category. So we have over 40 different ways to recover your data. These 40 different ways to recover your data are not just in raw data formats, they're in formats that make sense to your business. Best example is over under Exchange. You can actually export this data as an MSG file or a PST file. Moving over to SharePoint, you have your documents, your list within here. And of course, with Teams, we're working with those teams and chats. And bonus, in version 6, we're really excited to announce the SelfService Restore portal. The SelfService Restore portal will not only give access to your end users to be able to restore their data based on delegated rights, you will also be able to give restore operators the ability to restore through this portal a specified group of users, meaning you can take that load off of the IT department, say giving it to a manager. Their manager can restore their data for them, or different campuses for school, you can restore all of the students within that campus. Backup integrations into a backup copy, we're offering a better 3-2-1 option, sending data to archival object storage like Amazon S3 Glacier, Deep Archive, and Azure Archive repositories for second stage backup. So you'll have your primary backup to be able to do, say, all of your 6 months worth of data backup and then send off your older to an archival storage so you save money in the long term on that object storage. Bringing that all together, the console itself can actually import multiple organizations. So if you do acquire additional organizations, you can back them all up within the same console. We work both in cloud and hybrid types of scenarios. So if you do have a hybrid infrastructure and you're working on migrating that data to Office 365, you're able to add them into this console, do the backup, and migrate, picking up the backups all from one location. It's also very flexible in the primary storage type. Really anything that's S3 compatible, including on-prem S3 compatible, and migrating between these different repositories is possible. So you're not locked into just one repository type. And through all of those restore options, we have 4 specified restore explorers in order to restore the data that makes sense to that specific application type. And it's tailored to be very easy in the front-end user face, so you do not have to be an application expert in order to be able to restore that data. And bringing it to Edward to break down some of our documentation.
Okay, thanks, Corinne. And before we wrap up with a few takeaways, we do want to mention this is a battle-tested solution used by many different organizations, large and small, many different industries. 5.8 million users protected to date. Let's go ahead and get into a few takeaways here. So feel free to either read or share, or both, the Office 365 Backup for Dummies ebook. I believe we also have that linked in the resources available to you. And we also encourage you to take a free 30-day trial of Beam Backup for Office 365. Free for 30 days, no limits in terms of functionality. And again, like Corinne mentioned with the Community Edition, 10 users or less, completely free forever. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and hand it back over to you, David, for any questions that might have popped in.
Absolutely. Yeah, we got a lot of great questions coming in. While we take questions from the audience, I'm just going to bring up a poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about Veeam? And so let's see, where do we start? So many great questions. One of them that they're asking here, they wanted to know, what about the limit? Any sort of limit on how much data we can back up?
No, there's no limit on the amount of data that we can back up. It is recommended to use an object storage type, which gives you that infinite capacity to be able to back up whatever enterprise that you're working with.
Great, great. Let's see. This is an interesting one. What is the meaning behind Veeam?
So the name itself, I believe it's kind of shrouded in the history of the origins of they were thinking green, they were thinking virtual machines, they were thinking VMware or VM, and that's I think where they came up with Veeam. It's not an acronym for anything.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's interesting tidbit there of history. Another question here: can this product work in hybrid environments?
Yes, we do work with hybrid environments as well as multi-organizations, and coming new in version 6, we'll be able to do multi-geo regions.
Awesome. And then what about exactly how does the backup of Microsoft Teams work? I know that Teams is made up of multiple pieces. So how does that work behind the scenes?
So we're able to tap into the new Metadata API that Microsoft released. The Metadata API for Teams allows us to connect the front-end application aggregation to the back-end data sources. So we cannot just back up that back-end data from, say, Exchange or OneDrive when files are sent between two users, but we're able to know where in what chat those were sent within. And that's how we tailor our backup, so we know where that data was generated to send it back to the original location.
Cool, cool. Another question here: what about backing up SharePoint online?
So we do fully support backing up SharePoint or SharePoint online. I'm not sure there's more to that. Yeah, we fully support that.
Okay. And then this is a good one here. What are the benefits to backing up Office 365 if the information's in the cloud? I know you kind of touched on that, but maybe that's a good point to hammer home since that's such a common question.
It is one of our most asked questions, really, and it comes down to creating layers, because we know ransomware is becoming much more resilient. Compromised accounts and pivot types of attacks get into places we never could have imagined before, and having additional separations of data from the primary data sources, because if you do have a compromised administrator account, you could have your backups being performed with an entirely different account, entirely different subscription going to an entirely different object storage that account that was compromised for your primary data never had access to. So creating those separations of data can really be beneficial.
Absolutely. This is a good one here. Can the Veeam backup of 365 be integrated into Azure and scheduled?
Not at this time. We're always looking for feedback for types of integrations. If you want to submit that, our forms are a great place to submit feature requests if you'd like to see them come through the product.
Excellent.
Our devs live there.
Right, right. And then here's another one. So I back up my data from Teams. Where is that backup stored?
So that data is actually stored wherever you've specified your repository. So it could either be to an object storage type or an on-prem storage or an S3 compatible on-prem storage. And then wherever you would like to store that data is where that's going to go.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, and that answers another question here, if I can store my backup data on premises. Yeah, and then and then for folks out there, if they already have Beam Backup and Replication or they're considering Beam Backup and Replication, is this integrated into Beam Backup and Replication in some way?
This is not directly integrated into Beam Backup and Replication. It's a separate product for a reason, because it's a separate kind of data that uses different repository types. There's always the possibility the more we get requested for like future adds, but at this time it's not integrated.
Got it. Okay. And then how is security handled with the data that's protected? Can it be encrypted or protected in some way?
So if you have data go to like a bit-locked drive, that drive would be encrypted, but anything beyond native encryption for those data entities, we do not support because of the type of data that we're storing. It would be impossible to rehydrate and unencrypt an entire database to update and like aggregate those metadata files to the original location.
Got it. Okay. Josh was asking about data sovereignty. So do users have the ability to control where the data is stored?
Yes, so if you need to have it within a certain region, you can either have an on-prem location in that region or select that region in Azure or AWS or whatever cloud provider that you're using. That cloud provider could reside within a certain region to help you meet that sovereignty requirements.
Excellent. And then Justin's asking about licensing. How does that work?
So our licensing actually works off of a per user basis. So if you have a license for a user, you can back up their Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, all of that for that user.
Very straightforward. I like that. And then I know you mentioned there's a free 30-day trial. Can you tell us or remind us again, how does that work exactly?
So the free 30-day trial is completely unlocked. You can back up whatever you want to test out the full limits of the product. After the 30-day trial, it does revert to the Community Edition because it's the same product. It's just a key that unlocks with that license. So if you decide you like it but you don't need it for all of your users, you can still continue with that 10 users for free.
Awesome. I like it. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for our live Q&A here. I see at least 25 other questions in the queue for you all. It's obviously a very exciting solution for a lot of folks out here. Corinne and Edward, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, David.
And for more information on Veeam, as Corinne said, check out the free 30-day trial over at veeam.com. If you click on the link there in your handouts tab, in fact, the first link on the top, it will take you directly to that where you can get the Community Edition plus a free 30-day full trial license. Make sure that you check that out. And I also want to point out here this great comment from Joshua, who said that he can vouch for Veeam. I've used it, and where did it go? I've used it for the past 6 years, and it has saved me and my team multiple times. So thank you, Josh. I appreciate that feedback. That's great to hear. And let's see, before we move on to our next presentation, I just want to encourage everyone to respond there to the poll. If you have not done that yet, now is the time because we're about to move on here. So many great questions still coming in here from Veeam. For Veeam, I am routing those over to Edward and Corinne. Thank you for all those. All right, thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. It's now time to move on to our next presentation on today's EcoCast. I'm excited now to bring in Drew Russell, who is a technical product manager at Rubric. Hey, Drew, it's great to have you on. Take it away.
Appreciate everybody taking a few minutes out of their schedule today to jump on our webinar. My name is Drew Russell, and I am part of the Microsoft security practice here at Rubric. I want to spend a few minutes with everybody today talking about Microsoft 365. We're going to cover, what's the high-level landscape look like from 365 these days, and why that translates into more and more of our Rubric customers looking at 365 data protection seriously for probably the first time, since they've been a part of that platform. And then dig a little bit deeper into the architecture aspects of how we protect 365 itself. So let's jump right into it here. Like I said, wanted to cover what does today's Microsoft 365 ecosystem look like. Part of my job is talking to customers across the globe, every industry you can think of, every customer size you can think of, and they're all telling me, almost the exact same thing. Now more than ever, their business critical operations are flowing through Microsoft 365. And by its nature, that means more and more business critical data lives in the 365 ecosystem. And if we look at the stats Microsoft provides around this, it tells the exact same story. Just this exponential growth that they've seen over the last 2 years, with that only increasing with hybrid work kind of being the new de facto standard that's in place. Again, kind of across the globe here. The other thing that almost all of our customers are telling us is, they have a very limited last line in defense for this data. And that translates to 74% of the folks surveyed in this case have no data protection in place for this business critical data in 365. And since there is that limited last line of defense and all that business critical important data living in the ecosystem, today's threat groups view Microsoft 365 as a gold mine. And this is a direct quote from some of our partners over at Mandiant. If you're not familiar with Mandiant, they are one of the industry's leading cybersecurity incident response organizations. They're basically who gets called if the Fortune 500s of the world are breached. They go in and determine how that breach happened and then help the customer get back up and running. So these are the folks with the boots on the ground, analyzing real world attack situations. And they're, across their board, they're seeing a plethora of money being spent on understanding Microsoft 365 and then simultaneously how to attack it by these threat groups. That's one of the reasons why it's very easy to go out and find headline after headline, of these external attacks happening, across the board. It's not just one organization experiencing it. It's not just two. 70% plus of organizations have experienced some kind of attack happening in the 365 ecosystem. The other kind of really important thing to remember here, in the overall context of Microsoft 365 data protection is it's not just these external threats you have to keep in mind. It's also these internal situations that can happen, whether it is a rogue admin going in and causing havoc, or like this example from KPMG where they went to apply a retention policy. And if you're not familiar with those, we'll kind of cover those next. They applied that retention policy to 145,000 users accidentally. And with a click of a button, all of their chat history was deleted. So different situations like that really kind of have to be combined with these external threats that we're seeing in the ecosystem today to really understand, what the overall threat landscape looks like. So the next thing, you have to look at here is how does Microsoft look at data protection for Microsoft 365, specifically zero trust data security. If you're not familiar with that term, in essence, it means, never trust, always verify. And this slide is, in essence, a copy and paste directly from the Microsoft documentation, where they are focused around complying with legal and regulatory standards. And the way they have that categorized is into these kind of four broad areas. And each of these areas have a multitude of tools underneath it to help achieve these goals. So let's kind of start with the left side here and work our way through the flow here. So first step here is pretty obvious, right? You have to understand what data lives in 365 in order to protect it. Once you understand that data, you can start doing things like apply different protection policies to encrypt it, to restrict access. Once that's in place, the next step is, how do I present that data from being leaked accidentally, or how do I detect different risky behavior on top of that data? And then the last section here is govern your data, where the main goal is to retain the information that you need and then delete the rest. That way it can't be affected in any kind of, situation. And this is really the main area I want to focus on here. This is traditionally where we see our customers focused in terms of a core kind of data protection aspect in terms of backup and recovery. So dig into the govern your data section, right? This is, again, for compliance and regulatory requirements, not for backup recovery. And this is by design for Microsoft. The way they have this broken up is in two kind of broad categories here. So information governance tools and records management tools. Information governance tools are kind of the broadest area here. This is your classic business data that would live in the ecosystem, PowerPoints, PDFs, everything that you use to run your organization on a day in, day out basis. The main goal with the tools under this category is, keep what you need and delete what you don't. Like I said earlier, the concept here being if the data is not present, it can't be, accessed accidentally. It can't be, deleted by a rogue admin or, some kind of threat actor that got access to your environment. The next section here for records management is really focused around, actually, let me go back here. So the main tool that customers use in this information governance section is retention policies. Vast majority are going to be familiar with these. These are kind of on by default. In essence, what you do is create a policy that says, keep your data for X period of time. After that time period, it passes, delete that data from your ecosystem. And this is all automatically handled on the back end for Microsoft. So really a set and forget tool. All right, so going back to records management here, these are very specific use cases, kind of the diamonds here in the graphic. And the tools around this are very heavily centric around different legal and compliance tools or compliance regulations. And then other kind of very critical business data that can't be affected in some shape or form. The main tools we see customers using in this case is litigation hold. Pretty self-explanatory. You know, what litigation hold is, mark some piece of data as being on hold. Once that data is marked, if anything is deleted or modified, a copy is again automatically created on the back end in the 365 ecosystem, so it can be accessed later on if needed. And this is either through, you know, their extensive e-discovery suite that comes part of 365, or, you know, exporting it out to, you know, the corporate lawyers involved here. All right, so now that we have kind of a high-level understanding of what these native tools are, the question that's really driving all of the conversations today around Microsoft 365 protection is, what would you do if you're hit by a ransomware attack? Or what would you do if you experienced a rogue admin, or you know, somebody on your internal teams accidentally deleting the business critical files in your ecosystem? And these questions are you know, a top-down question usually. So they're being asked by the C-suite, they're being asked by the board of directors, and then probably just as importantly, or maybe even more importantly, is being asked by the cybersecurity insurance auditors. If you guys haven't had the I'll call it the fun of dealing with cybersecurity insurance, you know, the short version here is it is very difficult to get these days because so many payouts have been happening. The rates are just astronomical in this case. So, you know, if you're going through and, you know, if your company's looking at this insurance or trying to decrease your premiums, the auditors are going through and asking these questions. You know, it's, do you have this business critical data living in 365? You know, and if your Azure environment is compromised or your Microsoft 365 environment is compromised, what would you do in these cases? So, you know, in order to answer that question right, you kind of have to understand what this threat landscape looks like and how these native tools enable you to recover from there. So what we've seen happening is, you know, it's your core parameters being breached. It's not 365 itself. You know, they have a very, very solid platform in place in terms of their security mechanisms, but that 365 environment is still connected to the rest of your ecosystem. So threat actors can get into your ecosystem through, you know, any number of means. Once they have that, you know, we've seen them work their way up the stack to where they can get global admin access. At that point, they obviously have keys to the kingdom, so they can do different things like exfiltrate the data off of your platform, send it to their command and control servers, and then delete that data. Once that happens, you'll get the ransomware note, and then, you know, you have to figure out how to get that data back and get it back quickly. So, you know, the two options you have in place are to restore from those retention policies that we talked about earlier. In this case, though, they are, you know, since they're not designed for backup recovery, they can actually be used as an attack surface to your ecosystem. So, like we mentioned earlier from Mandiant and their, you know, their take on today's threat actors knowing the Microsoft ecosystem extremely well. You know, they're familiar with these retention policies. They went through, created a new one that said, find any data in the ecosystem that is older than a day old and automatically delete it. And just like that, everything is erased from the ecosystem. The other option here is that litigation hold we talked about. At the end of the day, though, litigation hold is not designed for mass protection. You know, if you kind of think back to the image we had, there was that small subset of those diamonds where Microsoft would apply these litigation holds. At the same time, you know, litigation hold by its nature also nullifies, you know, some of the other aspects of these native tools. You know, very easy to talk about retention policy here again, where the goal is to remove the data from your ecosystem. That way it can't be compromised. In this case, litigation hold, kind of negates that. The data still lives in your environment in this case. So basically that leaves you with no good options, and you're forced to pay that ransom to have, those threat actors send you back your data to get it back up and running. The other really important part to remember here is it's not just your 365 ecosystem that's being attacked in this case. It's the rest of your cloud workloads. It's the rest of your data center workloads simultaneously being breached and attacked here. So how does Rubric kind of come into play here, and how can we help in these situations? So, the most important aspect of this is being able to create this logical air gap between your Microsoft environment and then the backups that are stored in Rubric. So this is a full SaaS offering. We'll go into a little bit of the details here in a second, but in essence, we reach out to Microsoft 365, pull the data back into Rubric, and then have that fully segmented from your environment. That way, if threat actors do get those global admin credentials, they don't have access to your backups. They can't delete those. So they'll go through and, delete your data. But in this case, once you get the ransomware note, if you have Rubric in place, you're able to actually get that data back up and running, since it's in a fully isolated cloud vault on the Rubric side. At the same time, it's not just being able to recover your Microsoft 365 environment. In this case, it's being able to unify that protection across all your workloads, unify those restoration jobs. That way you can ensure your entire environment is back up and running. The really important part to kind of out here too, this isn't a Rubric versus Microsoft story. And in fact, it's quite literally the exact opposite. Microsoft has an amazing suite of tools focused around compliance. Our customers use them on a regular basis, and more importantly, they use them in tandem with what Rubric brings to the table. So the overall recommendation, right, is to leverage everything Microsoft has in place. Identify your data, restrict the access, have the encryption in place. But what Rubric does is allow you to protect from those external and internal threats that we mentioned earlier, and do it in a way that is fully automated from a management perspective, and then being able to get as granular as needed from the restoration jobs, and then do that in bulk. So worst case scenario happens, your entire 365 ecosystem is blown away from a data perspective. There's all that business critical data that you need to get back up and running. So Rubric allows you to do that in an easy to manage fashion. And that's exactly why probably, a month and a half, 2 months ago, we announced that Microsoft took an equity stake in Rubric, specifically around a kind of core joint mission statement up here, right, up on the left, I should say, all around being able to take the concept of zero trust data security and apply it to each of our joint customers. And really all that is being driven around 2021 main imperative of ransomware. And this is, like we talked about earlier, it's a C-suite level conversation. It's a board level, top of mind across the board. So, this investment from, Microsoft allows us to do a whole bunch of things on the back end, in terms of ensuring we have adequate protection in place, leveraging their engineering resources, their product management teams to make sure, the joint products we have in place meet their standards, meet the Rubric standards, and allow our customers to have a holistic data protection solution, for any kind of internal, external threat scenarios. So the fun part here, how does it work? So first and foremost, security is top of mind when we design the solution. So if we work our way through the stack here, start with being able to authenticate into your Microsoft 365 ecosystem. All of this is done through what Microsoft calls modern authentication. It's their implementation of OAuth. What that means is we never have access to your credentials. Microsoft gives us a one-time access token, and then from there, we'll create what are called enterprise applications to enable our API access into the 365 ecosystem. And then those enterprise applications are scoped specifically to the API permissions we need. Once we have those in place, we'll reach out to 365, like I said, ingest that data into the Rubric platform, all fully encrypted at flight, and then land that data in a Rubric Cloud Vault that is also fully encrypted. The important aspect here is that this is fully isolated from your environment. If you're 365 or Azure or really your main environment is compromised, these backups are secured in a Rubric controlled instance. Once that initial configuration is placed, you can take our SLA policies and apply those to each of the high-level applications. So think of applying an SLA policy to OneDrive, to SharePoint, Exchange. That way you have a base level of protection in place. And I guess to take a step back here too, if you're not familiar with the SLA policies, what they allow you to do is define your business use case and logic for backups. Take a backup every 4 hours, keep it for 30 days. Take a backup for a month, keep that for a year, and just kind of automatically handle that on the back end. You can also get down to the individual user level and get as granular as you want to with these SLA policies. That way you can ensure your VIPs, your top priority users, have a more frequent backup frequency than maybe the intern who started yesterday. When talking about Microsoft 365 protection, the most important aspect to remember here is it's an extremely complex API system that we have to work with here. If I relate this back to the on-prem world and taking like a VMware snapshot, we'll call the specific API for snapshot and then ingest the data into Rubric. There's no equivalent of a snapshot API in Microsoft 365. So there is 4 or 5 different APIs that we leverage on the back end. The main one being Microsoft Graph. Microsoft Graph allows us to talk to the individual applications through a single endpoint. But then each of those individual applications also have a specific API dedicated to them. So there's a OneDrive API, an Exchange API, etc. And each of these APIs have their pros and cons. So which one works best in situation A, which one works best in situation B, and at the same time, what happens if these API fails? They're used by something like 300 million users across the globe. So it's not a matter of if the API will fail, it's a matter of when. So how do we automatically handle those failures transparently and ensure that we are always ingesting your data according to the SLA you defined as part of your protection policy? The other really important part here is eking out the performance of these Microsoft APIs. So, since they are globally available, Microsoft does an amazing job of maybe amazing job, not the best way to describe it, but they very, very heavily throttle these APIs. If we're talking to a single connection point in a 365, we can hit those throttling limits almost instantaneously, which is exactly why our approach is to load balance our connections into the 365 ecosystem across multiple enterprise applications. And if you remember, the enterprise applications are how we have API access into 365. So we're able to achieve an industry leading level of performance to get your data back as quickly as possible here. The other part to kind of keep in mind here too is the underlying architecture plays a pretty important role in this as well. So under the covers, we're using the Azure Kubernetes service to dynamically scale up our compute workloads to meet your demand. So, for example, if you're taking a snapshot, we'll create a new container, or if you're doing a new restore job, create another container, and we can automatically scale those up to whatever whatever limits we need to ensure we're meeting your performance and reliability expectations. And at the same time, all of this applies to the rest of your ecosystem, whether it is in Azure or in your data center with vSphere. You can take these same SLA policies and apply them to those workloads as well, and then utilize the Rubric Players interface here, which is our SaaS-based application, to manage the recovery of those workloads in the event of an attack. So that's all I really wanted to cover today. The main goal was to make sure you have an understanding of what today's ecosystem looks like for 365, both in terms of its overall usage and what the threat landscape looks like for that, and how Rubric and Microsoft have joined together to offer a solution that allows you to take advantage of best of both worlds: the native tools from Microsoft that are focused around compliance and regulatory issues, and then the core backup and recovery that Rubric offers to protect you from internal and external threats. The other thing too is we're going to, I know we talked about doing a demo here. We actually have a new guided workthrough that we're going to send out as a leave it behind here. You can get hands-on access to the player's interface and walk through a demo yourself. in my opinion, it's way easier to understand that ecosystem by clicking through and getting actual hands-on time. So we will send that out here after the webinar as well. So appreciate everybody's time today. And I am in chat here if you guys have any questions. So please feel free to throw those out.
All right, great presentation. Thank you so much, Dave. Thank you so much, Drew. I really appreciate that. I learned a lot. Rubric is doing some really amazing, really innovative stuff there to protect Microsoft 365 data. I've just brought up a poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about Rubric? And we've got a lot of great questions coming in. I appreciate all those questions. Drew, like he said, he's in the chat here electronically in the Q&A pane. He's answering your questions live. So keep those questions coming. And I will leave this poll question up here for a few moments while I give everyone a time to respond, and also while I announce our first of the grand prizes on the EcoCast today. So we have an Amazon $500 gift card. This one is going to Robert Stockneck from Texas. Congratulations, Robert Stockneck from Texas. All right, thank you to everyone who's responding there to the poll. We do appreciate your feedback on that. I'll give everyone another moment here to respond. Great questions coming in. Drew is responding to those as quickly as he can. I do want to remind everyone about the link there in the Handouts tab to the Rubric website. And it's there that you can learn more about Rubric. And of course, they have their new ransomware recovery warranty, where they offer up to $5 million for ransomware recovery. So make sure that you check that out. Pretty cool feature there from Rubric. And of course, don't forget about Rubric's Ransomware for Dummies book, and also their boot camps that they're doing. Those are really cool. They're virtual boot camps. So lots of good resources there to get started with Rubric. And thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. We do appreciate your feedback on that. Let's now go ahead and go to a second poll. And this goes back to Scott Becker's keynote presentation. The poll on the screen is, when developing or evaluating new Microsoft-related projects and infrastructure, what do you prioritize? Do you prioritize doing it in the cloud, doing it in a hybrid deployment, or a 100% on-premises deployment? And I'm excited to bring back in Mr. Scott Becker to chat with me a little bit about this. Scott, you there?
I am, David.
Hey, it's great to have you back on. A really cool keynote. I want to chat with you a little bit about this poll question on the screen. And I guess my first question just was, so let's say I'm an IT manager, I'm a CIO, maybe an IT director. I've got a new application I want to spin up. It uses Microsoft technology. I'm looking at these three choices here on the screen, and I'm trying to picture, how do I decide? What do you think? If you were the CIO, how would you decide? Any recommendations?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I would think about is moving forward, how I want to be maintaining this application in 5 years, and making sure that I'm sort of future-proofing it. Just also thinking about like the way the IT organization might look, in the future. Am I going to have as many admins to do, patching or, integrations, or do I really want to offload some of that to the cloud providers to handle that end of it? But then, of course, where's the expertise? Do I have the expertise currently to support a cloud or hybrid deployment? It's so dependent on the individual organization's circumstances, and everybody knows that better than anyone else, for their own organization. But those are some of the things that I would think about, certainly.
Yeah, those are some great points. I mean, looking forward to the future, where do you want to be in the future? And then also kind of, turning the finger around and pointing it back at yourself and looking at your own, do a little, introspection of your IT organization. Where are you right now? Is this something that, you want to put in the cloud? Do you feel comfortable with that? Because so much of it has to be around the comfort level and the expertise. Or maybe you can look outside for a consultant perhaps to help you, with running this application in the cloud if you don't feel comfortable with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things this reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever seen it, is the pizza as a service diagram.
I don't think I've seen that one, no.
Okay, we'll have to do that for an upcoming keynote. So the diagram, helps you to decide on either on-premises, hybrid, or all the way up to infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service, and it makes the analogy related to pizza. So on-premises might be make your own pizza. You go to the store, you buy all the ingredients, you bring it home, you make it yourself. And then there's different levels, of that, all the way up to software as a service, where like the pizza is just delivered immediately to you, hot and fresh, at your table, kind of thing. There's take and bake pizza, and so it kind of depends, how much work do you want to put in, and look at the pros and cons, around that. So,
yeah, that's a great metaphor.
Yeah. So let's see. We are getting ready to bring in our next presenter here from Ping Identity. We've got him in the green room. Hopefully everyone has had a chance here to answer this poll question. One of the other things you pointed out in your keynote, Scott, was around the ecosystem. Kind of it takes an ecosystem. Microsoft, is no different from VMware or any other large technology software, where you typically don't just buy that one solution. Like you don't just, okay, we bought Microsoft and that's it. You don't just buy VMware and that's it. You buy Microsoft, and then around Microsoft you have all these different solutions that you need to really make it complete. You need data protection, you need third-party security, you need monitoring, you need logging, you need troubleshooting tools, you need storage that works well with Microsoft. And so I guess I was going to ask you, I mean, you keep up to date really well on the Microsoft ecosystem and the future of Microsoft. Where do you see that ecosystem, going in the future? Is it as strong as it used to be? Is it getting stronger, or is it kind of staying the same, or what's your projection?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's staying very strong. It's like, Microsoft has had a community of maybe, between 400,000 and 800,000 partners worldwide, for the last, 15 years. But I think that mix of partners is moving. What is the phrase? Is it shift left if you're going more to the development side? But
yeah.
It's definitely shifting in that direction, where I think you have a lot more ISVs who are building solutions on top of Azure, and so their products may not even look like a Microsoft product because it's all powered, by the Azure cloud. But it almost just looks like a software as a service or whatever. But there are more and more of those, and Microsoft is really pushing hard on building out its Azure Marketplace, which is a place for third-party solutions to be discovered by customers, and so there's a lot of activity there. So I would say the ecosystem is as vibrant as it's ever been.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, as Microsoft moves more to cloud-based offerings, and that those offerings expand, one might be concerned that will that gobble up the ecosystem, and I'm really not seeing that. The ecosystem is adapting to providing the same types of tools they provided on premises, but now in the cloud, as well as additional opportunities for new types of products and services that they never, dreamed of really before in the past decade. So
yeah, and I would add one more thing to that, which is that Microsoft's cloud services, and this is true, on the Amazon side and Google as well, but it's really lowered barriers to entry. In the old days, if you were an ISV and you wanted to provide a service, you had to build out a data center. And so you had to have a lot of that kind of expertise. Now you have your back end on Azure, and Microsoft is handling all this stuff and is capable of scaling it for you. So suddenly you really only need, primarily developers who are working on your solution, not the infrastructure underneath it. And that's really sort of opened up the ecosystem to a lot more, startups and companies that, don't need as much, financing and resourcing to get started. They just need a great idea and some good developers.
Absolutely. Yeah. All you need is a great idea and the cloud. And some good development. But yeah, times have really changed. From when I was an IT manager, I remember I set the estimate as, 1 month for any new application that you want to bring up in the data center. We need a month to spec out the server, order it, get it delivered, rack it, stack it, install the operating system, install the third-party tools, and then you can install the application. So it's like how times have changed, this great business agility we have today.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, Scott, it's been great bringing you back in, chatting with you about Microsoft technologies. Thank you for your insight and wisdom on this. I do want to share the results of the poll. That is 42% of you said that hybrid is the new model for you in the future. For any new applications, you're going to prioritize hybrid. And I think, analysts out there, I've heard them saying that as well, that, it's going to be a hybrid world. It's never going to be an all cloud or all on premises. It's always going to be a hybrid world of some kind. So I think the results of this poll kind of echo that as well. All right. So Scott, thanks again for being here. We got to keep the EcoCast moving here. I'm excited now to bring in our next presenter. Welcome now, Mr. Aubrey Turner, who is an executive advisor at Ping Identity. Aubrey, it's great to have you on. Take it away.
And I am an executive advisor at Ping Identity. The title for today's presentation is Supporting, Securing, Enhancing Microsoft-centric Environments. Regardless of where you are in your particular Microsoft journey, my objective is to share how Ping Identity can partner and lead to better security outcomes in Microsoft environments. To illustrate these outcomes, I will also cover some use cases as examples of where the rubber meets the road. So with that, let's jump right in. So a little bit about Ping Identity, if you're not familiar. At Ping, we have an intelligent identity security platform that builds and creates frictionless experiences in a borderless world. We support enterprise customers around the globe and across various industry verticals and sectors. As customers, we have over 50% of the Fortune 100, and we serve some of the largest banks, health plans, biopharma, and retailers with over 2 billion identities secured. So that's a little bit about Ping Identity. And let's talk about our relationship with Microsoft. So at Ping and Microsoft, we have a better together strategy. And ultimately, we have a common adversary and a common goal. So we need to work together for the betterment of our mutual customers. This better together strategy comprises fast and seamless integrations, as well as integrations that are co-developed and built in conjunction with our partners at Microsoft. And they're comprehensive in scope. And what that means is we can support a wide array of use cases. Like I said, I'll touch on a few of those as examples. But also this is important as those of you begin or start or are on your zero trust journeys. This comprehensive nature and wide array of scope will definitely be valuable in terms of, again, that kind of support and enhancement in these Microsoft-centric environments. The this kind of better together story reminds me of one of my favorite films, Top Gun. The protagonist and antagonist in Top Gun are Maverick and Iceman, and they're fierce competitors, frenemies, so to speak. But they have to work together, and ultimately they are better for it. So, we can, Ping and Microsoft, we can create these better integrations, more seamless type of integrations, and again, really at the end of the day, support the cybersecurity and identity goals of our mutual customers. So good news is, based on how Ping is built on standards, we can work seamlessly in Microsoft environments. And like I said, in some cases, we have co-developed these integrations. They are, wizard-driven configuration to make it as easy as possible to integrate. And so we work seamlessly with Microsoft, again, be it around Active Directory for directory services. It could be for Windows Hello, integrated password authentication, ultimately zero login, frictionless type experiences, as well as with the Windows operating system and other Microsoft applications such as Office 365 and Microsoft Intune. So the whole idea here is being seamless and enhancing Microsoft environments, and Ping can do that. And further illustrate that point, Ping also integrates with the rest of your enterprise. Let's face it, ladies and gentlemen, we live in a heterogeneous world, and many of our mutual customers are, have other systems and other enterprise resource applications such as Oracle and IBM. They are across clouds, Microsoft Azure, Google, AWS. They have custom applications, and oh my gosh, they're using Apple. So this is more good news in terms of Ping's neutrality and independence. We can support some of these last mile integrations to the rest of your enterprise where Microsoft may not. And so across these various scenarios, Ping can become the identity bridge and the gateway to integrating identity throughout the rest of your enterprise. One of the hallmarks, and I like to say Ping ethos, is we partner with your partners. So, we've highlighted in green some of the Microsoft integrations, such as, Azure from a platform perspective, endpoint, as well as sort of in the risk and identity verification conditional access categories. But look at the sort of playing field of other identity solutions and other cybersecurity solutions that Ping supports integration with. And this strategy of we partner with your partners goes back to that, helping you solve sort of the widest array of use cases and scope. This is, like I said, important from a zero trust architecture perspective. The initial steps include knowing, the initial steps of the zero trust journey include knowing and verifying your identities and devices. All users, devices are known, are authenticated and authorized. And so in that model, Ping can be the glue, if you will, that ties all of this together. Again, we partner with your partners. We also integrate cloud and hybrid. So in addition or combined with the aforementioned partner integration, we can create an even more even experience across your partner solutions. And so at Ping, we have 1,500 turnkey integrations that you can take advantage of. And again, as you look to leverage identity as a identity-centric zero trust is a key part of your cybersecurity strategy. Being able to integrate across Microsoft systems and applications is absolutely critical. But again, in this heterogeneous world that we live in, tying in sort of hybrid use cases is absolutely vital, and Ping can be that bridge or that gateway to those integrations. And so we'll talk about that a little bit more. So let's get down to brass tacks, kind of where the rubber meets the road over 4 use cases where, again, Ping can enhance and bring value to Microsoft-centric environments. The first one, extending Azure AD capabilities. I talked about this heterogeneous world, hybrid world. Many of us still have legacy apps that are doing, sort of header-based authentication or legacy authentication. And as part of the zero trust, the idea of SSO everything, we need to bring those into the fold, so to speak, in terms of a central authentication authority, being able to secure them. And so Ping can we have the flexibility of a proxy or agent-based deployment to secure these apps, and we can support multiple directories. Also importantly, bringing in risk-based adaptive authentication, MFA everywhere as part of that strategy. And then legacy WAM migration replacement options, we can connect to these WAM protected apps, again, in a flexible manner, and allow you to migrate at your own pace. So instead of ripping the Band-Aid off all at once, you still have to support the business still has to run, you still need to be resilient. And so we can, and even in scenarios of AD cleanup, AD migration, if you're doing one of those types of AD activities or use cases, again, where the Ping can extend Azure AD capabilities and give you the flexibility to migrate at your own pace. So don't just take it from me, and this will be a theme over the next couple slides, is taking it from someone else. So it's not just Aubrey who's sharing and saying these things. So Alex Simons, head of Microsoft's identity team, says Ping Federate is a very popular choice and is used to authenticate more than 4 million unique Azure AD users every month. Kind of a proof is in the pudding type of statement. Thank you, Alex. So again, well-established partners, better together. Number 2, modern multi-factor authentication for enterprise use cases. The thing that Ping brings to the table here is broader use case support, shooting for things like eventually zero login as part of passwordless, offline MFA, risk-based adaptive authentication, being able to consume multiple risk signals, working with things like Microsoft's conditional access, supporting a internal and external identity, so all use cases. Again, a key attribute or key requirement in terms of MFA for the modern enterprise. And then providing a SDK to embed MFA in your own mobile app. This can be an adoption story, an adoption strategy. And then passwordless, including Windows Hello for Business. So modern MFA for enterprise use cases, like Ping Identity is an authentication as well as authorization solution that embeds a risk, can certainly support these types of use cases. And so again, don't just take our word for it. Before I kind of talk about this slide, one of my another favorite film of mine is Tommy Boy, and there's a scene in the movie where Tommy's dad says, "I'll tell you what, you can get a good look at a T-bone by sticking your head up a bull's you-know-what, but I'd rather take the butcher's word for it." Gartner is the butcher in this case. And so don't just take our word for it. This solution comparison by Gartner, summer of 2021, I roughly believe. But here's what it's really telling, what's really important is that, and you can look in healthcare and manufacturing or other industries that have different types of labor. And so, hospital, it could be you have people in the corporate office and versus a clinician on a in a hospital floor. They are authenticating differently, and so the wider types of scenarios, authentication scenarios and methods that you can support, the better you are able to drive adoption and support a wider array of use cases. So that's sort of the impact of having different types of labor, and again, you need flexibility in those authentication scenarios and methods. And the same thing from an interoperability and ease of integration perspective, and there's certainly more to come on that. So being able to roll this out and have it be interoperability with a wide array of systems and solutions gives you the opportunity for a better outcome from an MFA across your enterprise perspective. Again, Ping's neutrality, means greater interoperability in this heterogeneous world. And unforgettable quote from Tommy Boy. We'll hear more from the butcher again in a moment. The third case is directory and unified profile. So this is a sort of maybe a migrate on your own time. We can reduce silos. Many of our customers have multiple directories or databases where customer profiles are stored. So we can reduce those silos, collapse those silos, unify profiles, which would be important from a adaptive risk-based authentication perspective as we collect more signals and use more context to make smarter, more intelligent access decisions. This will be very, very important and vital from a directory perspective. So we can manage, coexist with any directory. And two really big differentiators from a Ping perspective is a flexible schema that allows us to deal with unstructured data. Again, can be invaluable. And another key differentiator is Ping can support hundreds of millions of identities in a highly performant, scalable, resilient way across multiple clouds if needed. So again, the flexible schema and high performance, we can scale while reducing infrastructure costs. So reduce risk and also, contain and reduce cost as well. So that's number 3 from a directory and unified profile perspective, and takes us into sort of, orchestrating identity experiences. And our customers, Ping's customers, have been asking for this, telling us about this, and CISOs that I'm talking to say they are interested. I don't say only, and that may be too strong a word, but they're much more interested in products that support low and no code integrations. And the idea here is if you can whiteboard it, you can build it, configure it, and deploy it in a much more rapid way. So orchestration is something organizations are leaning into. And some of the examples, sort of identity lifecycle experiences that you can orchestrate would be MFA, enrollment, passwordless, for example. And so deploying these solutions in minutes and rapidly testing which of the experiences is more frictionless, for example. So kind of, you've got options A and B, being able to validate which one is going to, again, be a better experience. That is the idea behind orchestrating any identity experience. And so where Ping fits into this is, again, we're being vendor neutral. We can orchestrate within the Ping stack, but we can orchestrate thousands of other connections, including those within the Microsoft-centric ecosystem. So that's the value. And again, it's across identity types, so business to enterprise, B2B, and B2C. And this is a game changer from a identity security, zero trust, just a user experience perspective. And so, Ping is leaning into this. And just one kind of quick note here too, to accelerate our capability around orchestration, Ping made an acquisition within the last 4 or 5 weeks. So we can, again, deliver better security outcomes in a more rapid and timely manner. So here's the butcher again. So don't take my word for it. And so by 2024, low code, no code orchestration tools will be a critical capability for all access management products, up from 15% today. So we've been hearing about it. And like I said, we've made an investment to make sure that we can help organizations who are leaning into this maximize the value of their cyber and identity investments. And regardless of whether you are Microsoft-centric or not, this will be a solution that you can consume and help you maximize those investments and deliver more frictionless, better security outcomes. So now's the time for maybe a little bit of a religious and philosophical debate. Should your cloud provider be your identity provider too? You know, in a different form, we can probably make, you know, sort of equivalent arguments on both sides of this particular coin. You can probably also guess and kind of which way I might lean in this sort of religious debate. The world is, you know, the world is heterogeneous. I think having a intelligent identity platform that spans across all clouds as the control plane is invaluable, and sort of that neutrality to be able to work across all these various environments. I think that's vital, as well as being able to bridge hybrid. So we, again, live in this heterogeneous world. Much more to be discussed on that, but in terms of identity-centric, zero trust, having that, and this is where it's sort of the second question, what are the benefits of a single platform to manage all use cases? Having a central authentication and authorization authority, a single platform. One of the things that we're seeing and we've been solving is a blending of use cases between customer, employee, and partner. We continue to see convergence there. I think we'll continue to see these you know, emerging use cases, and we've already started to see some. I think identity-centric zero trust is in, you know, is a how we're going to solve or whatever strategy you choose to lean into. Leveraging identity to help create frictionless user experiences that differentiate your brand while balancing security and convenience, I think are going to be key. And so, again, a bit of a religious and maybe philosophical debate, particularly on sort of the question on the left. And like we're said, we're seeing some trends and some tendencies in identity that point to a single platform that will manage all use cases, be it internal or external identity. So some final thoughts. So whether your strategy is all in with Microsoft or not, Ping works extremely well inside and outside of the Microsoft ecosystem. Features such as risk intelligence, fraud, identity verification, passwordless, and orchestration, again, the big game changer, can create these frictionless experiences that harmonize security and convenience, really with the goal of leading to better outcomes for our mutual customers. I'll share another Top Gun quote here. You know, at the end of the movie, after the sort of climactic aerial battle, Iceman says to Maverick, "You can be my wingman anytime." To which Maverick replies, "BS, you can be mine." I'll let you figure out who's who in that analogy. So again, thank you for listening. As always, I encourage feedback, and let's talk about, you know, let's talk and imagine your future. Let's talk about use cases that you may have in addition to those four. You know, I don't know if I can resist one last Top Gun reference. So thanks for listening. Ghost Rider out. Take care.
Such a great presentation, Aubrey. Thank you so much. I love the Top Gun quotes. Another favorite movie of mine. So I've just brought up the poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Ping identity solution? Aubrey is in the electronic questions pane answering your questions as quickly as he can. And we appreciate your feedback here on the poll question. So I'll leave this poll question up here for a few moments while we ready our next presenter on today's EcoCast in the green room. I do want to point out that there in the handouts tab, you'll find a link to the Ping Identity website, and specifically the Workforce Identity Business Value Assessment. This is, to me, kind of like a calculator that goes and calculates for you the total value that you can achieve out of the Ping identity solution. So it's really cool. Just some sliders on there. You can slide back and forth between your workforce identities, your total revenue, total workforce applications, and total APIs, and then you can see the results immediately. So I encourage you to check that out, as well as all the other handouts that are there in your Handouts tab. All right, thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll question. We do appreciate your feedback on that. Aubrey always gives such a great presentation. It's always a pleasure to have him on. All right, and with that, it's now time to move on to our next presentation on today's EcoCast. I'm excited now to introduce you to Vanessa Toves, Solutions Architect for Microsoft 365 at Druva. Vanessa, it's great to have you back on. I'll hand it off to you.
My name is Vanessa Toves. I'm the Microsoft 365 Solution Architect for Druva, and today we're going to talk about protecting your 365 data. I'm going to start first with a tip. Right? If you are using or have the alert policies turned on in your tenant, this is an area where Microsoft services are telling you what's happening in the background. Right? They're telling you if files are deleted or you have impossible travel, whatever it is. But one thing you should do about this is if you're getting these errors and you're not doing anything about them, you really should, right? You should have a plan, because it's in here where Microsoft is telling you where you have a potential for some loss, right? For some data loss. So you can keep it simple. It doesn't have to be too complex. And we're going to use one example, the impossible travel. So for me, I actually usually recommend 4, maybe 5 steps that you can have. You can embed in your ticketing system. That is, number 1, if you get impossible travel, force a log out of that user. Then, right, for the employee, reset their password, or if you're using, right, if you don't have MFA on, turn it on. The IT department needs to check their device and scan it for any malware, any issues there, and then blacklist that IP. Not too complex. You can respond to this alert with a couple of very simple steps. Now, if you don't, right, the issue will continue and continue. They're telling you that a user is having an issue. Someone is trying to log in from Australia, from wherever, from Germany, from somewhere else, that it's not possible. Right? So it's a potential for a compromise of a credential at that point. All right, now we're going to continue on. So your Microsoft 365 data needs to be protected. There is a message that is associated to 365 that was never with the on-premises versions of Microsoft technologies, and that is you don't need to back it up. Right? For some reason, once companies went into 365, they started just relying upon Microsoft's platform, and that's very right. That whole message is misleading. Now, our customers come to us for a number of reasons. They come to us for, whether it's part of a cloud-first strategy, or right, they want to control their cost of their backup storage that's expanding over as their data grows. A number of reasons, right? So relying upon retention or relying upon version history, those aren't mechanisms that a company can say that is part of a DR strategy, right? So that messaging, it's also misleading because on a daily basis, Microsoft is their entire ecosystem is faced with vulnerabilities, right? They have an entire website that I'm sure not very many people go to and monitor about those vulnerabilities, from their servers to their desktops to any OS type of things to 365. And it's those vulnerabilities that kind of also affect a customer beyond just the threats that you have for 365. Your Exchange Auto Discover, one that was released last month alone, where it had the potential for exposing, I think, a few hundred thousand customers their credentials with this Auto Discover. I mean, so the threats that customers are facing, they go well beyond just 365. It's things that affect the data that's in 365 as well, right? That compromise of that credential. Now, all of the data, if you didn't know, all of your data in 365, you live under the umbrella of the shared responsibility model that's published in Azure. Right, it's your data, and you're responsible for backing it up. This has been out. This page has been out for a long time, and most customers don't even know. Most of 365 customers don't even know that their data lives in Azure. Right, whether it's a SQL storage, a SQL Server, an Azure Blob, whatever it may be. But that's why you're under that responsibility, that shared responsibility model, and you're required to back up your own data. Just last month, Microsoft released an article. It's the very first time that they tipped their toe in this message of, your step number one for recovering from a ransomware attack for Exchange Online, number one is to check your backups. Right? And there's a reason why. It's because what's native in 365 doesn't enable a customer to go and say, I need to recover to 3 days ago, 6 days ago. I need to recover 1,000 or 200 or 7 employees. Right? This is why they're beginning to now message this, because customers have been missing this for a long time. They've been relying upon something, and now Microsoft is telling you you need to back up your data. Right? Even though this article really is focused on SharePoint and Teams, it also will apply, and does apply, to OneDrive and, the article is focused on Exchange, but it will also apply. Eventually, they're going to dip their toe all the way in to tell you that you need to back up your OneDrive and your SharePoint and your Teams. Now, step number 2 that Microsoft recommended was to disable the OneDrive sync, right? Active Sync and OneDrive sync. And the reason why that's important is because that OneDrive sync is a technology that takes files from point A to point B up into your OneDrive or to your SharePoint. Right? It doesn't really monitor the files. It doesn't live under some kind of governance. It just transports that data, whatever state it's in. There's an additional functionality with Microsoft with OneDrive, and that is a backup, right? To use it as a backup. What they're looking at is to say, hey, stop backing up your desktops or your laptops and let us do that. So now not only are you dealing with files that you originally had and saved in OneDrive, but now all of your documents, everything under your desktop folder, and your pictures are also being pushed and transported with this tool. So it's important to understand, right? This is step number 2, disable this, because it's transporting files and up and into your 365 area. Right? Now, when we talk about these threats, the top 3, Microsoft stated, I added one other one: compromised credentials, compromised endpoints, cyber attacks, and I've added to that end users, right, and admins. Now, depending on where you are and how much data you have in there, the more time you spend, the more your users add, you have that exposure, right? And if you recall that first tip that I talked about, you have an impossible travel threat, and it happens over and over and over, and you have a potential for a compromise of a credential. So this is where we talk about the exposure, right? The exposure isn't at the service layer of necessarily an Exchange or OneDrive, but it comes through the end user potentially. It comes through, right, that interaction. So the more data you put in, the more exposure you have, especially if you're not monitoring and right, having visibility and plans for what your 365 is telling you have threats. So when we talk about, the threats in your 365, you also have to realize that when you're recovering, what are you recovering? It's not just about a file at that point, right? It's not about an email. It's also about what's inside of your 365. Right? As a solution architect, my job was to listen to a business problem like we continuously fail our call quality audits in our call center, and they managed it with a spreadsheet. So as an architect, I look at the platform and I can design a solution with multiple apps. So when you're recovering information, you have to be able to recover the investment of this process as well. And it's not about just getting back to a file or an email. It's about getting these employees back into the process that they've been using to track, right? And it's also not just about ransomware. I mean, I've mentioned it, I've talked about it. The threats in 365 also come from your administrators and their ability to affect content they don't own, they didn't curate. Users and their lack of knowledge or even too much knowledge about what they can do. And then what are you supposed to do with your terminated employees? So there's a number of things that we have to deal with in terms of in addition to ransomware itself. Now, from an administrator perspective, there's a number of ways, and I mentioned this, right, that the administrator has the ability to affect content they don't own and they didn't curate. Now, 365 is very wide and it's very deep in its administration, which means if you have a very low or high ratio of employees to your help, your support, and you don't have dedicated admins for 365, sometimes it's hard for them to understand what's at the other side of that button. Now, a good example in addition to this one was I was with a customer recently, and all of a sudden their chat in one of their teams started disappearing. They didn't know why. And while we were in this conversation, we went and explored their retention policies, their policies. And one of the things they found was an admin that was no longer there had set up this test policy, to see, let's see what happens after a year. I want you to be able to delete. I want to delete all the chat in these two teams. Now he created it as a test. He was no longer there. There was no auditing of the stuff that happens. In fact, it's rare that organizations audit the settings that they have, their security settings, their retention policies, any of these things that could potentially end up with a loss of information. So this is where we talk about administrators, not necessarily, by any fault of their own. It's they're also Okta admins and Jira admins and Salesforce admins. So they're spread thin, and this platform is very deep. Okay? Now, users and other areas of SharePoint, of 365, you've been able to delete and not recover even with the SharePoint on-premises version. Right? So these issues have been in place for a while. There's no recovery. There's no recycle bin for the permissions that were in place yesterday. You can't go and say undo. If someone's using the move functionality, there's some improvements that have happened with it. It's a little bit more stable, but when a user clicks that button, they didn't realize that it's not a migration tool. And what they're trying to do is move 10,000 files and 400 folders. And the help desk ticket that you're going to get is, hey, half my stuff is here, and I think the other half is here, help me. See, there's no undo button. There's no recycle bin. Retention didn't help me. Right? So there are things that occur that have, that have nothing to do with the stability of 365. It's up and it's running and it's doing great. Right? These are features and functionality that you cannot recover from in SharePoint. Now, we talked about OneDrive sync, Disable your OneDrive sync. Now, there's, in addition to, it being the number 2 step, disable this. And when you think about that, if you have 1,000 employees, the level of effort that you're going to have to go through to make sure it's off on every single one of your employees' computers, I don't know how much time you have, but that's a lot. That's a lot of work right there in and of itself. It's not It's not an enterprise recovery platform. When you're dealing with a ransomware or even malware or ransomware, calling up 1 or 2 or 3 users, that's not going to be an issue. You might walk them through and say, hey, why don't you use your native OneDrive? But what about when you have a ransomware attack and you have to recover now not just 20, 30, 50, 100, 1,000 employees? Are you going to call them up and walk each one of them through this? I don't think so. You're definitely not going to call them up and say, hey, I'm going to go reset your password for you, and I'm going to do this manually. You need an enterprise tool to be able to deal with an enterprise issue, right? To be able to recover, have a response for mass recovery of your OneDrive or your SharePoint. Now, in all of this, all these vulnerabilities that we talked about, it takes just one, right? This goes back to that what you're doing to monitor these issues, like the compromised credentials, right? The impossible travel. So if you only have one point of failure, whether it's a user, it's a vendor, It's an app that you deployed and installed, or a user deployed and installed on their teams. And those are the points of vulnerability that can cause data loss. Now, how does Druva protect your 365 data? It starts with architecture, right? We use what our architecture is really based on object-based storage, which means it's not like Veeam or something like that where it's file-based storage, a file structure. So ransomware cannot execute in an object-based storage world. It can in a file-based storage world. Right? So that's part of it. It starts with the architecture. Second, it's also about zero trust. We do not have access to your data. You have access to your data, which means I personally cannot get into anyone's backup unless they invite me into their own instance, right, and add an account for me to go help support them. So that's how it works with our envelope encryption, with our multi-factor authentication, with your integration with your SSO. So a number of things that are going to say your backups are yours and they are not the property of Druva's, right, or our ability to access them. Now with your 365 and how it works is we connect with your Azure, we utilize the Microsoft API services, we connect to your 365 data, and we use the Azure AD. Those are the core components that we interact with on the back end. And of course, our Druva Cloud Platform. Now, there's two parts to this. There's the part where the administration of it, right? This is where you can have your admins come in, you define your backups, you're going to see all of the content that we back up and protect for it, right? Druva backs up and protects for you. You also have another area where you can enable self-service restore for your users, and that could be 1 or 3 or 5 or all users. Now our Druva services layer connects out into, we talked about that, our 365, also Salesforce and Google, your VMs, your Oracle databases, your SQL Server databases, or your AWS, right? So our platform is designed to scale. It's designed to scale by a number of, whether you're a small customer or a big customer, but also we're planning to scale to incorporate more applications that you're using to protect. Now, how do we connect? It starts with a global admin account. And I know most of you out there, if you're admins, that you're getting some heartburn right on there. But in fact, it's probably only a few minutes that you will provision, or we will use that. The reason why is we're provisioning an app in your Azure, and that app also is getting permissions set against it when you select this next step. You're defining exactly what applications the Druva app has the ability to protect. Right? So we don't have to have access to everything, but we definitely, if you want to back up just SharePoint or OneDrive, right, you're defining that. That's what's happening with that global admin. As soon as it's done, you can remove the global admin rights to that and make it a regular user at that point in time. Right? So we absolutely consider your security, right, the security of your information. Accessing your content, we connect and stay connected. The Druva app connects to your Azure AD. If you add a new user, that user, right, based upon if you've identified some properties, that user will get backed up or it won't, depending on how you've configured it. And so that's automatic. It's cyclical, right? It constantly adds, or it's constantly doing that. Now, accessing your Exchange, OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams, that's done through Microsoft's own API services. So we're not doing any backdoor jobs or backdoor PowerShell to accommodate that, right? Your tenant has to stay in a supportable state. So we utilize just what Microsoft is giving us. Your access to your content also, we have reads, and then we have, right, update or add new, or create. So it all depends on what the action is that's being taken. Now, when I was a solution architect for, as a consultant, or I worked for a big company and I did software selection, what I looked for in a backup tool was flexibility and granularity. The flexibility in how it could be tailored to adjust to how a company worked, right? And whether it was secure, and the granularity of what I could restore down to. So with our role-based and app-based administration as well, right, you're able to tailor that to how your team works. If you have a US team and a UK team and they need to see different users, right, you have that ability. You also have the ability to have your user data be incorporated into our profiles, right? Profiles somewhat similar to a group, a 365 group, but you can define things in those profiles that says these 10 users get backed up twice a day, and we're backing up and protecting their endpoints and their cloud apps and their Google, right? Sorry, their Google Drive. So that's kind of like this really great feature to where you can then turn around and say, and only these people have access, right, to this profile. So here's how that breaks down. I create a role called the 365 admin. I can assign that to 2 different people, and those 2 people only have rights to Exchange and OneDrive. And then that, both of them have access to the majority of the profiles that are in there, right, depending on where they are. But only one person down here gets access to the leadership profile, which means that person, she can actually see and support, right, restoring of emails, restoring of OneDrive files for that leadership team. You also have right, another role where you have a cloud admin. They have access to your VM backups, right, to your SQL Server backups, as well as 365. And then you have a workload admin, like for 365, where they can see everything. So having a flexible model like Druva does to help support how you work is extremely important in terms of our architecture. Now, as you know, I've talked about this, right? As a solution architect, you build these solutions and they're not in silo. You don't build solutions just in SharePoint. You build them with a combination of these apps, which is one of the reasons the 365 platform is just fantastic. But with that being said, with regards to enterprise data recovery, right, this is absolutely where Druva closes a gap. Right? It makes this platform even more whole. As great as it is, we have a gap there with what is native. So this is how we protect the data that you're putting into 365 by closing that gap. And we can do that in under 15 minutes. All right, well, thank you guys and have a great day.
Great presentation, Vanessa. Thank you so much. While we take questions with Vanessa, we are going to just bring up a poll here for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about Druva? And we appreciate your feedback there on the poll. So a lot of great questions coming in. Vanessa, you ready for some questions?
I am.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's see. First one that came in, they're asking here is, why does Microsoft follow the 3-2-1 rule? And we shouldn't need to if they're already doing that. I guess is the question really, does Microsoft protect your data or not?
Yeah, you know what? I'm sure Microsoft does that. Right? They have a service. Their service is to have 365 up and available. So I'm sure in their architecture they are. And backups that they might use, they're using that for the purposes of their needs first and foremost. Of course, they don't want to lose customer data, but it's different when we're talking about a customer's own data and following a 3-2-1 rule, right? So hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And then another question here, I know Microsoft 365 is made up of multiple things. It's not just one thing. So what they're asking here, I believe, is what pieces of Microsoft 365 can Druva protect?
Druva protects your Exchange Online. So that would be your user mailboxes, your online archives, your shared mailboxes, public folders. We protect your OneDrive files, right? Your user files in OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams. And awesome. on our radar is, I think our next one up is actually Planner.
Okay, excellent. Yeah. And then another question here. So once the data is backed up with Druva, does Druva have access to that data?
No, we actually do not. Like I have no ability to go and, if I could even figure out where it was, right, navigate through the world of anyone's backup. Now, it's also how it's stored, right? Our architecture both splits both the metadata and the file out. So we also don't store it in some structure that's easily understandable, or identifiable. It's not like I can say, I'm going to go to my the HR department's SharePoint site and navigate to the documents library and then go and get, download the file. So I have no direct ability as an employee of Druva to do that. And access to the data itself, it follows a best practice of both, the data is encrypted with, with an E-key, and as well as a security or a security token. I think, I'm totally going to forget that. A token that's generated by the customer as well. So they have access to their own keys. We don't actually have access to that.
Excellent. And then here's an interesting question from Devin, who wants to know, does Druva offer object-level restore for AD user attributes?
AD user attributes. So we don't actually protect the Azure AD today,
okay.
Right? That we actually don't have a service that does that. However, we do have, where we mentioned membership, I think you said, membership is could be associated to a SharePoint site, to a team, to a file. So who has access to a team? We restore the members and the owners, right? We restore, who a file or a folder was shared with. But no direct AD attributes, like nothing coming straight out of the Azure AD.
Got it. Okay. Good clarification there. And then do you support storing user information at different locations?
Yes, absolutely. We absolutely support, right? It's called data residency. So I believe we have like 16 regions across the AWS world, right, the globe. So within there, if a customer has a location in Australia, in the United States, and one in Germany, they can actually define by AD attribute, in fact, where a user's data could be stored. So all of the data, especially for organizations that have to comply with like GDPR, you can actually store that data in any one of the storage locations in Europe. So good question though.
Cool. Yeah. And then let's see, what about this one? How long can I keep information of someone who's left the company?
Yeah, that's another good question. I mean, ultimately, that's up to you, right? So you can create retention policies very similar to, the retention policies you can create in 365. So whether it's an indefinite or if it's a 7-year, that's really dependent upon your decision, right? A customer's choice.
Excellent. And so if folks want to get started with Druva, what do you recommend?
Well, you can actually go to our website and sign up for a free trial and get started immediately. It's actually really easy to get logged in, right, or to have this free trial. And within minutes, you can connect to your tenant if you have the rights, and begin backing up your SharePoint or your Teams. Back up your own email, back up a team that you belong to, and so that would be the best thing I would say.
Absolutely, yeah. Sounds like a great way to get started. I mean, it's all software, super easy to do. So I think that's a great place for us to wrap up our Q&A here. We're running out of time, but Vanessa, there's some more technical questions there for you in the electronic queue. You always give such a great presentation. Thank you for being on.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
And I encourage everyone to check out the handouts tab. There is a download from Druva called Overcome the Native Data Protection Gaps in Microsoft 365. It's got a lot of great information in there. I encourage you to check that out. All right, I'll leave up the poll question for everyone to respond to. If you haven't yet, the next Amazon $500 gift card is going out to Clinton Rice from Pennsylvania. Congratulations, Clinton Rice from Pennsylvania. All right. Thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. I'm excited now to bring in our next presenter on the EcoCast. Welcome, Chris McCarthy, Senior Product Marketing Manager at RingCentral. Hey, Chris, thanks for being on.
Hey, how's it going? Thank you for having me. Very excited to be here today. Can you guys hear me okay?
We can, yeah. Take it away, Chris.
Perfect. So, like you said, my name is Chris McCarthy. I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager here at RingCentral, and I'm really excited to talk with you about Microsoft Teams and how we work alongside them in the context of phone. And I know that there's sort of a mentality that we are a competitor of Microsoft Teams, but in a lot of ways, we provide solutions that really enhance the experience within Microsoft Teams and the Microsoft ecosystem as a whole. So what I'm going to talk about today is how we help Microsoft customers unlock really reliable, really powerful calling for Microsoft Teams that helps streamline workflows, makes things easier on IT, and gives you advanced functionality and features that Microsoft does not have available to you yet. So with that in mind, the first thing that I always love to talk about is global reach and reliability. One of the things that I think is really, really important to think about in the context of telephony is the reliability. As you all know, Microsoft does experience some outages. They've had outages over the past few quarters. And one of the things that's really damaging about that is the potential of your business being unable to communicate with vendors, being able to communicate with customers, being able to communicate entirely within your internal staff. So RingCentral provides a 5 nines SLA, that's 99.999% SLA guarantee. It's financially backed. That essentially means that you really don't have to worry about any kind of significant downtimes. It's about 6 to 8 minutes of downtime a year. That's both planned and unplanned outages. It's very, very minimal. Compared to Microsoft telephony or Microsoft in general, they have a 3 nines SLA, which is very good, but it's the difference between minutes and hours. I think the other thing to talk about is that we have 44 countries with native PSTN services. So it's the same calling experience, it's the same reliability SLA across all of those countries with native PSTN with local and toll-free numbers in 110 plus countries. Essentially what we can say is that we provide a very, very robust global telephony network that you can rely on and ensures availability and connectivity in a global organization. So it's really, really important, and it makes it very easy to trust the service and trust that you'll be able to communicate regardless of the circumstances. One of the things that we really pride ourselves on is that for the past 13 quarters, we've been able to maintain the 5 nines SLA. Whatever happened with COVID, it didn't affect our SLA guarantee. Everything remained the same, remained very, very stable. The next thing that I really like to talk about within the context of Microsoft Teams is providing a calling service for any business use case. One of the things that I think is really, really important to note is that, while Microsoft Teams is a fantastic app, we don't necessarily live just in the Microsoft Teams app, right? If we're in sales, we live in our CRM. If we're in marketing, we live in our email tools or Marketo. If we're in HR, we work through our HRIS application. And all of these services could benefit from added telephony and added capabilities, right? So we understand that covering every calling use case is really, really complicated, but it's also really important and necessary for your business. RingCentral simplifies that process and makes it easy to add telephony to any kind of application that you might have and might run your business from. And it also makes it really, really easy to kind of mix and match use cases. So you could have your basic end user that just needs dial tone and connectivity within Microsoft Teams. We can cater to that through a couple of different means, right? Whether that's direct routing or an embedded dialer, which I'll show you in a few minutes. Or if you need somebody that lives solely within your CRM system, we can provide calling capabilities there too. So for all of the phone capabilities that you need for everybody across your organization, we can meet your needs in a variety of different ways. One of the things that is, if you take away nothing else, it's that we can provide the choice and flexibility that you need to run your business in whatever unique way you see fit. So regardless of how your employees work or how your employees operate, we have the ability to provide calling solutions that not only complement the Microsoft Teams infrastructure, but really enhance the workflows and make things easy for your employees. So I really love to talk about that and talk about how the use cases are seemingly endless. We have, in addition to these main integrations with CRM systems, HRIS applications, we have a platform and network with over 244 out-of-the-box integrations. So, any conceivable application, all the most mission-critical and commonly used business tools are accounted for. But we also have open APIs and an open network, open APIs and an infrastructure that allows you to, build new applications and add telephony, add messaging capabilities to other applications. We have a developer platform that's 50,000 users strong that are all trying to develop custom use cases that you can take advantage of. So in general, we have a phone platform that really makes it easy to identify, create, and expand on use cases. So our platform is a huge, huge benefit. I kind of mentioned this already, but I think it's always great to double down on the integrations, the platform, and network. We have a huge, huge quantity of out-of-the-box integrations through our platform. But again, we have open APIs and an ecosystem that allows you to customize and really sort of build the use case that you see fit. So again, within the context of Microsoft Teams, we can provide telephony that seamlessly integrates with Microsoft Teams, but we're also providing telephony in the areas of the business that you really rely on. So again, your CRM systems, your HRIS applications, if you have in the education vertical, if you have some sort of education tool like Canva is a common integration that we use. So really any and all mission critical applications, we have the ability to add telephony and streamline your workflows. One of the other big benefits that we provide in conjunction with Microsoft Teams is analytics. We have a really, really robust analytics feature that allows you to understand call quality, call performance, troubleshooting, resource management, even things like AI-based capabilities like sentiment and analysis. We provide a really robust tool set to understand what's going on within your organization from a calling perspective, which is really valuable to understand where you need to improve things and how you can continue to provide advanced features, where you need to focus your efforts. So in terms of analytics and in terms of understanding where things need to be improved, we have a really, really robust feature set that I think really complements the Microsoft Teams experience and makes it easier to communicate in the long run. And I mentioned that there are a couple of different ways to utilize RingCentral in the context of Microsoft Teams. So the different ways that we provide integrations, I think you're very familiar with direct routing as well as other integration types. But I think it's really important to kind of discuss the differences in sort of what each one offers. So first and foremost, if you're looking for a way to provide calling use cases across the board, you're looking for all of the advanced use cases, you need something that is covered by global compliance, reliability. We have something called RingCentral for Microsoft Teams, which we commonly refer to as our embedded dialer, right? So essentially what this does is it integrates a RingCentral dial pad embedded in the Microsoft Teams sidebar that when you make a call within the Microsoft Teams app, it pulls you out of the Teams app and into the RingCentral app. So it's not a completely native or hidden experience, you do have to download the RingCentral application. But once you do, you have a very, it's not quite a native experience, but it's a very close experience that allows you to take advantage of all the various features and benefits that RingCentral offers, right? So the main benefit is you get things like, out of the gate, you get SMS, fax, admin and executive features. You get all of our advanced cloud telephony features. All of those things come within the RingCentral for Microsoft Teams package, and you don't need any additional Microsoft Teams calling licenses. That differs a little bit from our direct routing solution. With direct routing, if you have an E5 license, you don't need to pay anything else, but you also, if you're not on E5, if you're on E3 or E1, there is an $8 direct routing fee on the Microsoft end. But apart from that, you get many of the features and benefits of RingCentral. You get a completely native and hidden experience that essentially leverages the RingCentral telephony service on the back end. So you, as an end user, would never know that you're not using Microsoft Teams. It's completely native, and you're essentially using RingCentral to power your Microsoft Teams calling capabilities. So it's bringing the reliability and the advanced capabilities of RingCentral Cloud RingCentral into the Microsoft Teams app experience. Moving forward, we are going to be announcing that there is a plugin into the Microsoft Teams app that allows you to take advantage of the advanced features like SMS, fax, and the exec admin features, but that is going to be an additional download. So essentially, all of the capabilities will be available across both the direct routing and embedded dialer. But again, there are a couple of trade-offs there. So I guess the moral of the story, the thing that I'd really love for you to take away is that RingCentral provides advanced features, reliability. We provide global telephony network. We provide advanced analytics and a number of great features that really provide a better experience for Microsoft Teams telephony. And again, we provide a flexible offering and a lot of choice that allows you to customize the use case to your needs. So with that, that's sort of my piece. I'll pass it off to you guys, and we can get into some Q&A.
Absolutely, yeah, great presentation. We do have some questions for you. And let's see, I'm going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the RingCentral solution while we take your question? So if you have a question about RingCentral, now's the time to get it in. Let's see, Chris, first question I see here that came in, they're asking, how do we choose whether I should go with the embedded dialer or direct routing, and what's the difference?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think, again, the main difference between the embedded dialer and the direct routing solution is that the embedded dialer is not completely native. So it does provide all of the advanced capabilities out of the gate, out of the box. But, from an end user perspective, from an IT perspective, there is an additional app download and a little bit of training involved. So what I would say, the guidance that I would recommend is kind of get a pulse across your organization about the number of use cases, the number of teams that would need, telephony services in addition to Microsoft Teams, and kind of understand the best use case. So if you need a ton of users that really just need dial tone added to Microsoft Teams, but you're kind of cost conscious and want to sort of reduce the cost, that would be sort of a use case for the embedded dialer, because you can spin things up really, really quickly. There's no additional Microsoft Teams calling license costs, and so on and so forth, right? Conversely, if you have an organization where everybody's on an E5 license, you're already essentially paying for the Microsoft Teams calling plan, and you really only need the dial tone and calling. That would sort of be an opportunity to think about the direct routing plan. So I think first and foremost, it's important to understand where you're implementing telephony and then have a conversation with a RingCentral rep to kind of explore the opportunity and the specifics of what you need to cover.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying those differences there. Next question, they're asking about integrations. What can I integrate with RingCentral?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. I kind of covered it a little bit, but I think in general, it's always great to focus on our platform and network. So again, RingCentral has more than 244 out-of-the-box integrations with the most popular and most noteworthy business applications. But again, we do have open APIs and an open platform that allow you to create custom use cases and really integrate with any and all applications that you use. So I think if you go to the RingCentral developer website, you're able to take a look at all of our current integrations. You're able to take a look at sort of our platform ecosystem and our developer network, and you're able to sort of get a really deep understanding of the sort of use cases that we can provide. So again, if you have a variety of different organizations that all live in various applications, think about the benefit of adding telephony to all of those applications, right? So if you again, you might not think about adding telephony to something in HR, but what if you had an HR benefits person that needed to call 30 different people in a day to talk about their benefits? This is something that makes it really, really easy to activate something like click to dial. So again, I think understanding the full breadth of your organization and what they need to add telephony to is where you can really add value.
Excellent. And then here's an interesting question. As a Microsoft Teams user, why should I go with RingCentral?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's always a great conversation to talk about the benefits of RingCentral in conjunction with Microsoft. But I think the real reason to go with RingCentral for added telephony is that we are, by and large, the highest rated cloud phone vendor on the market. We built our entire platform from the ground up around phone. We started with telephony. We started with cloud PBX. So from a phone perspective, we have the most robust and most, widely regarded as the most effective phone cloud PBX solution on the market. We have the most robust feature set. We have the most robust reliability SLAs. We have the most robust integrations and the best telephony platform and network available. So just in general, if you're looking for a cloud PBX solution with advanced feature sets that really works well alongside not just Microsoft Teams, but the entire Microsoft suite and Microsoft environment, this is really the way to go. So if you are a Microsoft customer, we have the ability to provide additional capabilities and added telephony that makes things a lot easier for you. So that
Absolutely.
would be yeah.
Okay, cool. And then what about, can voicemails be forwarded to an external mailbox?
Yes, they can. So that is something that you'd be able to set up in Service Web. So once you are a RingCentral customer, it's really just kind of setting up those rules on the back end.
Okay, got it. And then there's a couple questions here around pricing. What does pricing look like? And they're asking, how are minutes priced?
So we actually don't charge by minutes. You can go to RingCentral's pricing and packaging website, the RingCentral's pricing and packaging page on our website, and you can see what our various packages go for. It explains sort of how we break down the cost, but there's no phone SKU per se, so it would just be under our MVP packages. So I highly encourage you to take a look at the pricing on the website, because that would give you sort of an estimate for how much things would cost.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, Chris, I'm afraid we're running out of time here in our live Q&A. If folks want to get started with RingCentral, what's kind of the easiest route to do that?
Yeah, I mean, really the best way to get started with RingCentral is going to our website and requesting time with a RingCentral account executive or subject matter expert. There's a number of resources on the website if you want to look into direct routing options or our embedded dialer in more detail. But yeah, you can contact somebody directly from the website and get in contact with a RingCentral rep immediately. So I highly encourage you to do so.
Excellent. All right. Well, thanks for being on the EcoCast today, Chris.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your time.
And for more information on RingCentral, check out the handouts tab there as well. There's a link to the RingCentral Getting Started with RingCentral for Microsoft 365. So make sure that you check that out. All right. Thank you to everyone who responded to the poll. It's now time for our next presenter on today's EcoCast. I'm excited to welcome Dave Martin, who is a Senior Director for Product Management at Open Systems. Dave, are you there?
Hi, David. I sure am.
It's great to have you on, Dave. Take it away.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hello and welcome, everyone. Just as a means of introduction, I'm responsible for our Managed Detection and Response service here at Open Systems, working with our Security Operations Center team and our development engineers on delivering continuous monitoring services, looking for advanced threats that have bypassed existing controls. What I wanted to share with you today is, you see from the title, Weather the Cyberstorm with Managed Detection and Response. And perhaps just to start as a bit of background, I think for a long time in our industry, we've had a very naive view on threat actor activity. And for a long time, the security model has been to purchase a bunch of prevention technologies, firewalls, web application firewalls, IDSs, antivirus, and so on, deploy that, and then really kind of set it and forget it. And I think what the industry is now realizing is that the threats have evolved, they're much more sophisticated, and that you have to be continually monitoring your potential attack surfaces to determine if your prevention layer is working properly. And continuous monitoring means looking at everything 24/7 for signs of suspicious behavior. And this fundamentally is what managed detection and response is. And there's generally two ways to go about this. You could choose to do it yourself as an organization, and or you can engage with a provider such as Open Systems, who delivers this monitoring and threat detection and response as a service. And we tend to see most of the do-it-yourself approach tends to be the purview of larger enterprises who have the means to stand up their own SOC and hire their own security experts and so on. In general, most mid-sized companies really, it's not their core business, and they don't have the resources really to deal with the complex cyber threats today. So really what I wanted to cover today is essentially best practices in continuous monitoring. What should you be doing or looking for, either doing if you're planning to do this yourself or looking for in a service provider who is offering a service. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our solution at the end, but I hope you'll find this informative and educational. And just as context for setting the entire webinar session up here, I thought it was useful to describe what many organizations are facing today and what generally is the state of cyber. In short, it's super complex, and frankly, the odds are stacked against the defenders. And if you look at the trends that we're seeing, we see phenomenal growth in the number of attacks that most organizations experience. This is due in large part because the weaponization of threats, it doesn't take skill really to launch a broad attack. There's a lot of development. There's malware distribution networks that threat actors can rent. And so it used to be back in the day that there was some skill involved in committing these attacks. And unless you're worried about nation state sort of targets, being a target of nation state activity, generally speaking, it does not require a lot of skill to pull off an attack. Many of these types of attacks, the economics are such that threat actors can cast a wide net. They only have to have a small percentage of attacks actually be successful for the economics to work out for them, because there's commodity malware that can be rented or purchased or used quite easily. And the other thing that's interesting is that it used to be that you, from a defender perspective, we're looking for software that was malicious. Increasingly, what we're seeing is attacks that are extended campaigns, where threat actors establish a foothold in the network, and then they live off the land, what's called living off the land. Essentially, they use protocols to commit their action on objectives that should be there. They use tools and systems, and they're essentially hiding their activity in an effort to subvert detection. And so this is also very damaging and very difficult. So the complexity combined with the ease of committing these attacks is really a challenge for many organizations. And then, of course, on top of that, the world has changed quite a bit. Most companies are operating a hybrid environment and moving more and more to the cloud. They have home users, and so the potential attack surface has become much more complex. And in response to this, if you look at what the defenders have at their disposal, it's really a challenge. I mean, there's way too many tools from a security perspective. The average enterprise has around 50 security vendors they're dealing with, which is just incredible to think about. Most organizations that I see are in a mode where they're continually in react mode. It's very ad hoc, their processes. They're fighting fires. And to compound problems, in many organizations, there's silos between the IT team and the security teams. There's many studies that have shown that as much as 70% of attacks happen because of misconfigured infrastructure, and this silo between IT and security is not helping. And then finally, it's been well documented that there's a negative unemployment rate in cyber right now for SOC engineers, people that really understand the domain. And so these challenges really are stacking up to form the perfect storm in cyber right now for customers. And this is what managed detection and response or continuous monitoring as a tool, as a way to combat this complexity is really showing very good results and very effective. And what does that look like? What should you be looking for in these areas, people, process, and technology? I touched on this earlier. You obviously want people that understand the current nature of threats and then how they're likely to evolve or how they are evolving, and to stay on top of that. And one thing that I would highlight is security at its root is a big data problem, if you think about it. I mean, a SOC is essentially getting signals from the infrastructure and from user activity and so on, and that's a big data problem. Often there are terabytes of information being forwarded to the SOC on a daily basis. Many organizations don't employ data science to help reduce noise and amplify signal for analysts. So that would be one key thing I would encourage you to really look at. It's just too much. The alert fatigue syndrome is real, and you want to really make sure that you have it covered. Process, again, you want consistent, repeatable. We call them missions, but essentially you're doing the same thing over and over again, assessing, preventing, detecting, and responding. Doesn't matter the threat. Generally, these activities in these 4 areas, assess, prevent, detect, and respond, are required. And this is how you get out of the ad hoc firefighting mode. And then finally, technology. I see a lot of companies that where the tools dictate the workflow and the SOC workflow and the way to process alerts. And it should be absolutely the other way around, where you need to abstract the tools away, and the tool should support the workflow, not the reverse. I'm going to touch very briefly on each one of these in a little more detail. If you're working with service providers delivering this as a service, really insist on transparency. There should be no black boxes. A lot of times, many customers I talk to, they have an arrangement with their service provider or MDR provider, and they get alerts thrown over the wall, if you will, at them, and really have no visibility into the service provider's process or the tools they're using. So insist on complete transparency. It goes without saying your MDR provider should operate 24/7, have geo resiliency, so have SOCs in multiple locations, and should be able to recruit and attract top talent. From a process perspective, I touched on this earlier. Essentially, what you want to do is there's 2 sides of a coin I like to describe, and there are many cyber frameworks that cover this. NIST is a good source for a lot of information on this model, but essentially there's 2 sides of a coin. On the one side, companies need to reduce their attack surface. So how do I harden, make my footprint smaller to make it more difficult for threat actors to exploit and achieve their action on objectives? And then on the other side of the coin, there's defending the infrastructure. So you want to reduce the attack surface and you want to defend the attack surface, because you have to assume that you're in a constant state of breach. It's unfortunate that the state of cyber has reached this point, but really to minimize your risk, you want to be focusing on both sides of this coin, reducing the attack surface and defending the attack surface. And many MDR providers are focused on the right-hand side, the detect and respond piece. Forward-looking providers and organizations that are doing this also have activities in the left-hand side of the slide here, the assess and prevent. And I've got an example here I'll go through in a little more detail, but the whole idea of reducing your attack surface behind this is that, there's nothing faster than avoidance. So if, through hardening, through patching regularly, through reviewing your authentication silos that you've created, and essentially a myriad of essentially just good best practices for hardening your infrastructure, you can avoid a lot of challenges and a lot of threats. And vulnerability mitigation, scanning, and so on is all a part of that. And as I say, NIST is a good example, but there's many cyber frameworks. And I guess the point I really would like to make with this slide is that this should be continual process. This is why you see the arrows here, that we really need to look at this as an end-to-end series of missions in terms of things that have to happen in order to reduce risk for your organization. And if you're developing a security program, you really want to make sure that you have activities in each one of these quadrants. It's the best way to minimize your risk. And then finally, I'll move on to technology. This is sort of an architectural view. I mean, the actual individual components will depend on your security stack and your team and so on. But I wanted to give you a sense for, particularly if you're looking to outsource this to an MDR provider, some of the things to look for. And you see that we have essentially 4 layers here. And there's the control layer, what I've been calling the prevention layer so far in this session, where you have actually deployed all of your prevention technology. And essentially what you're doing is collecting telemetry or information, log data, if you will, from that control layer. And that's going into usually a SIM. And I will say that at this point, candidly, the SIM, generally speaking, is not living up to the promise of the technology. I mean, what I see a lot is, when you purchase a SIM, many companies just start throwing logs at the SIM, and of course the SIM vendors really want companies to do that. Unless you have some compliance requirements where you have to log everything, that's probably the worst thing you could be doing, because you want to be thoughtful about what you're ingesting into your SIM, your tool. You should really look to ingest security relevant data only, and essentially reduce noise for your SOC. If the SOC team in this mission layer you see here has noise in the system, they're not going to be able to find the signal. And so be thoughtful and purposeful about how you ingest data. Is the SOC team really going to use it? And part of that analysis is when I see this particular alert or I get this information, I'll either fire an alert to someone or I'll use it to correlate against some other activity. And you should have a playbook or run book associated with all these things. But in any case, the whole idea from an architecture perspective, a technology perspective, is that you use the SIM to surface investigative context, and usually this is endpoint detection and response, sometimes network detection and response, and sometimes both, sensors, if you will. You have asset context, so you should understand what your critical assets are in your environment and who your users are, particularly your admin users. And then there's control logs, and all of this gets fed into the mission layer, and all this serves as information in those 4 cycles I mentioned earlier to reduce your risk. And we typically classify threats into these different categories that you see here, and the whole goal of the mission layer is to mitigate these threats. And looking at this holistically, the coordination layer is often needed to run things to ground, that this architecture surfaces run suspicious behavior to ground, and you need the help from the InfoSec team, network team, different apps, cloud teams, and so on. the point I want to really make is in this architecture, you'll notice I haven't mentioned any specific tools or vendors or anything of this sort. I mean, the whole idea really is that we should be abstracting the tools around and rather build a model for detecting and responding to threats that can be surfaced in your environment. And to that end, let me go into a little bit more detail about an end-to-end mission for detecting and response. And this is a lot more steps than you would imagine. I mean, the first thing I touched on this is you just need to understand, what do I have to work with? Where's my security relevant data? You have to identify that. Then you have to figure out, how am I going to collect all that data? And of course, you want to do this securely. So you're going to want to use encryption. In transport, you're going to want to use authentication so you can ensure the confidentiality and integrity of the data that you're working with. And importantly, we're going to want to develop a detection methodology. I can't stress enough how often I see companies that are looking to implement some sort of 24/7 monitoring. They don't have a detection model or methodology. The thinking is that, well, we're just going to collect alerts and respond to critical alerts. And this is really sets organizations up for failure right from the start. Collecting alerts and kind of hoping for the best is not really the right strategy here to get good, predictable results. And in our case, I'll talk about this a little bit later in the webinar, we have a model where we have endpoint, network, and cloud sensors. And essentially, we augment those sensors with context information and context logs, but we rely on the sensors as our source of truth for what's going on in the attack surface, potential attack surface that we're monitoring. And this really helps clarify an alert that is ultimately going to be a false positive for one that's actually a true positive indicator of a breach or an attack. So this is super critical. And then you have to deploy it. You have to deploy the sensors and deploy all of this. So here we've gone through 4 steps, and we haven't even started monitoring. And really, this is just from again, if you're either doing this yourself or you're engaging with an MDR service provider, have a discussion around the prep for deploying the service and what does that look like, and make sure that they've put thought into sort of these major areas here, because this often will determine the effectiveness. You have to execute, but this is the plan, basically. So you need to make sure that you've got a solid plan here. So finally, before you start monitoring, you need to know what you're going to do when you surface a threat, an actual attack. So you should have incident response plans in place. And part of our onboarding services, we work with our customers to develop an incident response plan, develop escalation contacts based on the criticality of the assets that we're monitoring and so on. Because what you don't want to be doing is, when you're in firefight mode, trying to figure out how to respond and who to contact and how to contain and these types of things. You really want to develop this all up front, and it takes time and people with domain knowledge. Now we've done all that, we can start monitoring. So we start monitoring. The whole idea here is look for suspicious behavior using our detection methodology we talked about earlier. If we don't see any, we just keep monitoring. That's the way that the process works. If you see it, what you want is you want to create a ticket, some note for an investigation. You don't want to take the alert that you receive at face value. There needs to be some analysis of that information. And generally what you'll see, and if you're doing this yourself, what you'll want to do is enrich the alert with threat intelligence information, with entity information, also any data science or ML or AI that you can add to provide probabilities of things being malicious, and then context or correlation of all the information that you've collected in the preceding steps. And there's a little arrow here, circular arrow, because this is an iterative process. Some investigations can take 30 seconds to conclude that they're a true positive based on what you receive. Frankly, some may take hours. Some may take days, depending on the type of threat that you're dealing with. So this is an iterative process that you're always going through. And the whole goal, of course, is to determine if it's true positive. If it's not a true positive, then that means it was a false positive. So you have to tune your monitoring. You have to update your use case so your team isn't bombarded with continual false positives, and then you close the ticket. If it is a true positive, you want to go into incident response mode. Usually involves major activities in communication and containment. often you have to decide, is the threat contained or not? We're seeing more and more multi-staged campaigns where threat actors will install backdoors before they're detected, and then once they realize they're detected, they activate those backdoors. And so there's usually multiple phases to the more sophisticated and damaging attacks. I've got one example here in the next slide, I believe, real world example for you. But the whole idea is to contain the threat. If it's not, again, you're going back to the analysis mode to figure it out. And then finally, an important step that a lot of companies don't do is once you put down the threat, you need to really do a root cause analysis and figure out what preventive controls need to be adjusted to harden the infrastructure against that type of attack. And this is a step that's often ignored, but super important. I mean, one thing I've learned is that if you don't figure out how the threat actors got into the network, they will be back. And that's a guarantee, unfortunately. So this is a real-world example of a detection that a campaign that we detected probably about a year or so ago now, but I'm using it because it really illustrates the sophisticated nature of these attacks these days. But in this scenario, there was an initial infection of a host, and the detection came in the form of our SOC, and essentially the host, we started seeing alerts that Mimikatz was being used to steal passwords out of memory, which is a popular program to do so. And what essentially happened was the threat actor compromised a host, got the real user's credentials using Mimikatz, and then started probing the network for network servers. And they go to network servers because those are often the location where a lot of people connect to, a lot of service accounts connect to, and they can harvest more credentials, and that's exactly what they did. And in this case, they found a domain controller that had a service account that had been misconfigured with admin privileges. So this is a really, really bad mistake because now the threat actor had essentially the keys to the kingdom because they had admin privileges on an account that wasn't tied to a user. Service accounts can be programs that your developers or your business apps may be using to log in remotely. And so they tend to be very noisy and not well monitored. And so threat actors love to use service accounts because it can obscure their activity for a period of time. In any case, we detected all this. We reset the accounts, essentially locking the threat actor out of the network. And then the threat actor pivoted. We started to see command and control traffic to other servers where they had installed Trojans. So this is literally a threat actor knew that they had been discovered, and they went to Plan B. And we again went through that whole analysis phase I talked about on the preceding slide. And ultimately, we're able to lock the threat actor. And in this particular case, this was a good news scenario because we had caught them before they really were able to do substantial damage in the organization. And then, of course, we adjusted the preventive controls to prevent this type of attack and the tactics used in this type of attack moving forward. So this was a real great win for the customer and for us, obviously. I'm coming up on my time limit. I just have 3 slides on open systems. We do offer a managed detection response service. We've built our service specifically on top of Microsoft Azure, and we're seeing a lot of alignment with our customers who are making investments in Azure. They're looking to consolidate their security stack, and essentially we leverage the licenses and the infrastructure that the customers already purchased as a part of their broader Microsoft spend, and we use those tools to do the continuous monitoring and detection response that I highlighted. I wanted to point that out, and just also share that companies that adopt the best practices that I've covered in this session. There's a report out by Accenture. If you're having trouble justifying expenditures in this area, this is a great resource for you. But it essentially was a pretty detailed analysis that showed that companies that have the best practices that we've covered here really do reap the benefits. They're 4 times better at stopping attacks, 3 times better at fixing breaches, and they can also minimize the so-called blast radius or the impact of these types of threats. So the benefits and payoffs are huge for the investments you're making, and I encourage you to dig this study up if you feel it will be helpful in justifying investments here. And then finally, just to wrap it up, a slide on open systems. We are a global company. We operate 3 physical SOCs, one in California, Northern California, one in Switzerland, and one in Hawaii, which you can imagine is a very popular place for our SOC engineers to visit. But we're operate globally. We're 180 countries, supporting roughly 3 million users. Very proud of the service and the infrastructure that we've built up. And if you would like to learn more about open systems or our solution, I would encourage you to please visit our website at www.open-systems.com. And yeah, I think, David, that's it. And I think it might be a minute over, so apologies for that.
No worries. No worries. Great presentation, Dave. I really appreciate that. We do have some questions for you, and I'm just going to bring up our poll that we ask after each presentation here, and I want to call everyone's attention to that poll on the screen that says, what additional information would you like about the Open Systems solution? And so if you have a question about Open Systems, now's the time to get it in. I mean, we did a poll at the start of the EcoCast here around, what are your top challenges, and security was very high on the list. I think it was tied for number one, if I recall. So obviously there's a lot of need for the solutions that Open Systems, provides here. Let's just start with this first question. They're saying, you mentioned your solution is built on Microsoft's security stack. What advantages does that bring versus other solutions that work with any other vendor's stack?
The principal advantage is that we're able to build a very high fidelity solution by limiting the amount of tools that we have to support. A lot of MDR providers will support whatever infrastructure exists. They'll support Splunk or Logarithm or Sentinel or any handful of SIMs or other types of tools. And the reality is that trying to develop a model where you have very high fidelity, accurate detection and response across that broad set of tools is just really daunting, and frankly, I don't think possible to any good quality. And so what you see is, from a selfish viewpoint, this allows us to do a good job essentially for our customers, because we know exactly the way the stack is going to behave. We have playbooks and runbooks and automation because we know what types of telemetry, what type of syntax we're going to be getting from the solution. So it really allows us to build an effective service versus trying to go too broad and do it for everyone where you get mixed results. And then the last thing I kind of touched on in the session here today is that many companies are making consolidating their security stacks and their tool sets by going to Azure. And so they see strategic alignment in their investments there. We're essentially helping them operationalize those investments, helping them get good use out of those tools. So those are really the sort of two principal benefits. And I guess one final comment that I'll say is that, the Microsoft stack is really very good. There's varying quality levels of all of the different tool sets, but we've been quite pleased with the performance that we get out of the Microsoft security stack.
Excellent. Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. Another question here, you mentioned that it's so hard to find and retain good SOC engineers. They're asking, do you have any advice on that?
That is a difficult challenge. We have issues finding people as well. We're not immune to that. I think the one thing that we are able to do that many organizations aren't, and many other providers, is really retain that talent. And we do that because our model is slightly different. We have a model where we have a designated security or SOC engineer for some customers and only those customers. And we do that for two reasons. One is I'm a huge believer that the better you know the environment, the better the detection will be. So we allow our SOC engineers to get to know the customers and their environment. We set them up for success that way. And then also their trust relationship builds between the customer and our SOC team. And I've always said that we need to be more than monitoring. We need to be we need to be a partner for our customers on their security journey, and that type of model sets that up. And so all of that is to say that our SOC engineers have a wide variety of activities. They are supporting multiple customers with different environments. They develop relationships, and they grow professionally. And this allows us to retain it. It's every job has its stresses, and certainly SOC analyst and engineer is no exception. But we've really created a model where our team feels professionally challenged and get satisfaction out of what they're doing. They're not staring at the same alerts every day for the same telemetry, where you'll see in a lot of call centers, it's just all they're doing is processing alerts from various systems all the time, and that gets to be a real fatigue issue. So those are some of the reasons we're able to retain talent a lot more
Yeah,
easily.
absolutely. Absolutely. I know that's a huge challenge these days. So great advice. And there's a couple of folks out here, who are talking about outsourcing security monitoring, and they want to know really what should they be looking for?
I think some of the things that I covered early in the session, look for someone that has a model and opinion on how to do detection. Everyone is going to say, it's a nice thing to say, we're just going to collect all the alerts that you send us and detect suspicious behavior. Everyone says that. The reality is that if you peel back the onion a little bit, you'll be able to readily tell whether they're just sort of collecting alerts and hoping for the best, or they have a model. So ask them how they go about that. One thing that we do at Open Systems is we use the MITRE attack framework to benchmark our detection, and we do internal reviews. And we understand for a various threat actor tactic what part of our detection model is going to surface that behavior, that tactic. And we share this with our customers. We share our coverage, we share our use cases that we developed, again, 100% transparency. Often what we'll find, some customers they just want the outcome, and we're quite happy to deliver that. Others want to participate in the process to some extent. They have some security expertise they want to bring to bear, and we welcome that. The more defenders, the more members of the blue team we have working on the issues, the better we're going to be from a risk perspective, minimizing risk perspective. So I think those are the things to look for, the most important things. There's a lot of other things, many RFPs are many pages long, but I would optimize around the approach that the provider is taking and their detection model to really determine the quality level.
Okay. Wise advice. I appreciate that. All right. Well, it looks like that's all the time I'm afraid we have in our live Q&A session here, Dave. But great presentation. Thank you so much for being on the EcoCast.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
And thank you to everyone out there in the audience for your questions. We do appreciate those. I want to remind you about the poll that's on the screen. Don't forget about that. I will leave that up. We want to get your feedback on that poll about the open system solution. I will announce now our final prize winner. We have an Amazon $500 gift card. And this one's going to Mitchell Hoffman from Massachusetts. Congratulations. Mitchell Hoffman from Massachusetts will reach out to all of our gift card winners as well as our best question prize winners after the event today. Don't forget about the handouts tab. There is a resource there from Open Systems on the 3 reasons to choose, manage detection, and response. So make sure that you download that PDF before you go. It won't be as readily available after the event as it is right now. All right, before we wrap up, I want to remind you, don't forget to subscribe to the 10 on Tech podcast. It's over in the iTunes podcast store or wherever you download your podcasts. If you are a potential sponsor of an upcoming event you'd like to present on an EcoCast or MegaCast, reach out to us at connect@actualtechmedia.com. And finally, I hope to see you next week on our Enterprise IT Virtual Summit. Are the approaches in 2022 for identifying and understanding emerging technologies and strategies. This is happening next Wednesday starting at 11 o'clock Eastern. This is going to be a huge event with 9 expert presentations and some amazing prizes. So we hope to see you on the EcoCast, we hope to see you on the virtual summit happening next week. You can register at events.actualtechmedia.com or watch out for an email invitation to this upcoming virtual summit. After the EcoCast ends today, you'll be automatically redirected to our Refer a Friend page. If you didn't hear about that at the start of the event, this is where you can refer your IT friends or coworkers to Actual Tech Media's online events, and you both can win an Amazon $300 gift card. We hold that drawing each month. And so as soon as we wrap up here, you will be automatically redirected to that page. Thank you for telling your friends and coworkers about what we're doing here at Actual Tech Media. I hope that you enjoyed today's EcoCast on supporting, securing, and enhancing Microsoft-centric environments. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.